Hello. Thank you for joining me again for the final part of the Hypnotic Assassin. Just got to move my drinks around, make sure they're in reach. That one. So if you aren't already subscribed and you like this or anything else I offer on my channel, feel free to subscribe. If I've got a coffee with me this time. If you like this, feel free to give a thumbs up. Let's just see. I see some of you are here bright and early. So hopefully it'll all work fine. Yes, will he succeed or will he fall at the final hurdle? I'm sure Ellen will be fine if I say deeper and deeper. Or even just deeper, once. Can I finish without yawning? Nope. Let's have a look. I will start reading in just a second, but I will quickly flick down this. Backwards and forwards chatting. Right, I'm at the bottom. Where'd I put my book? There it is. So, the final part. It's the final countdown, as somebody once sung. Just trying to move my chair forward a bit without bashing into the computer. I'm going to keep yawning now that I've actively attempted to make myself yawn. So, part 4 of the Hypnotic Assassin. This is chapter 15 onwards, and it ends with an introduction to some of the techniques used in the story. So I'll probably read that and then obviously take any questions or answer any questions, etc. after that. As we know, a couple of people have unfortunately passed away in the story, so we'll see where it goes from here. As I left Joe's house, I noticed the wind had picked up. I felt that there was probably rain and a storm on the way. I needed to get a taxi to my next location. To increase my chances of finding one, I walked back main shopping streets. I saw a string of taxis heading my way down the road, so I hailed one of them down. The black cab chugged over and pulled up alongside me. I climbed into the back and thought, with so much space in London black cabs, it made me wonder why celebrities don't use black cabs instead of struggling into the cars they seem to get into, revealing all after parties. I told the cab driver where I wanted to go, and we pulled back out into the traffic. My first thought, having pulled out into the traffic, was that I may as well have walked. We seemed to be barely moving. I was looking out of the window at pedestrians passing us by. We're also being overtaken by blue Boris bikes. It felt like we were the only thing not moving, and I was paying for the privilege. I could see the meter ticking away, clocking up how much I was going to be spending. I decided it would annoy me if I spent too much time looking at how much my journey would be costing for travelling just a short distance. So I struck up a conversation with the driver of the cab. His name was Chris. He showed an interest in talking about hypnosis. I made a point of pretending to be ignorant and not knowing anything about it, because I didn't want him to associate hypnosis knowledge with me. I wanted him to assume I appeared not to know much about hypnosis, and that he had to try to educate me. We spoke about hypnosis for about 45 minutes before Chris told me we're about to arrive at my destination. I told him a destination that was about 5 minutes walk from where I needed to go. I'd paid the driver the fare, thanked him for the interesting conversation, told him I'd learned a lot and hadn't really thought about hypnosis before as something to take seriously, and then got out of his taxi and continued on foot. I was now heading to Frank Warren's house. Frank lived in a flat overlooking the River Thames. I approached the private gated area carefully. I didn't know how I was going to get into this flat. I was going to have to get through the gates before I could even get to the front door of the building. The gates didn't have guards on them, but they appeared formidable and almost impenetrable. They could have been rammed by a vehicle to get in, but that would be about as subtle as opening a can of beer with a sledgehammer. Ideally, I didn't want attention drawn to me. The gates worked by code or electronic swipe. I wondered how guests got in, as there didn't appear to be an intercom, and I couldn't imagine that all guests were given the code or given a swipe card. My only way in was to be brazen and approach the front gate confidently, hoping I could type the correct code into the panel on the gate. It looked like if you typed the code wrong 3 times, an alarm sounded. I'd never specifically tried to use my skills in this way before. I had an idea of something that could work, but didn't know whether I'd have enough time at the gate to figure it out. This was only a gate for residents at the 20 or so flats I could see within the complex behind the gate. The challenge was that it was already about 3:15 p.m. at this point, and so it may become busier soon with people finishing work. If anyone did turn up, I'd have to hypnotize them, which would prove a little more difficult if there was going to be more than one person in a car, or if more than one car turned up at the same time. Those I hadn't hypnotized could get suspicious and panicky, potentially calling the police. This was a risk I was going to have to take. If it all turned into a great big calamity with everything spiraling out of control, putting lots of people at risk, then I'd just have to handle it and contain the situation as best I could. I walked over to the panel to take a look at it and work out what the best approach would be to figure out the numbers. As I looked at the panel, I decided that the answer may lie in noticing imperfections. Every time someone types the code in, they wear away the buttons they press. This is ever so slight, but as people know, with all the goods we buy, wear and tear happens regardless of how well we try to look after things. The only solution to preventing such damage is not to use the item at all. Clearly, something like a pad of stainless steel buttons will get used regularly, especially given the occupants of each flat needed to use the pad to get into the compound containing their home. The buttons would also attract dirt and imperfections from fingers touching them day in and day out. While I was looking at the pad, I told my unconscious mind to enhance all imperfections. As a hypnotic assassin, we're taught to look for minimal cues, things that are subtle differences or changes that have always been there. It's just that most people don't notice them and don't even know to look for them. As a teenager practicing my skills, I used to stand on train station platforms exactly where the doors of the train were going to open. I was practicing my acute observation skills. I remember one day a friend of mine, John Lewis, asking me how I knew where to stand exactly where the doors were going to open. I told him that I was just using my observation skills and seeing something that had always been there, but most people don't pay attention. To. They don't know to look for this thing, and because they don't know to look, they don't see. He asked me what it was that I was seeing that he and everyone else wasn't. I pointed to the ground. He looked at the ground, looked at me, looked back at the ground, looked back at me, and then asked, "What?" I told him that when hundreds of thousands of people get on and off a train every day at exactly the same point on the platform, their constant treading wears away the platform ground, leaving a slight indentation. I explained how this happened over centuries at churches and other old buildings, and happens in busy locations. John had never noticed this before. He'd never noticed how the ground was more worn away and smoother where people step out of and onto the trains with such regularity. I also explained that people have a habit of spitting their gum out just before they board trains, and there are often other signs that can give clues as to where the doors will open when the train stops. So all I was going to do with the pads was to allow my unconscious to enhance these subtle cues and see what revealed itself. I was hoping that the number wasn't changed regularly. This would make it much more difficult. I was fairly confident that in a complex which looked only a few years old, they probably didn't have much need to have changed the numbers already. As my unconscious enhanced the imperfections on the pad, it looked like everything was becoming embossed and enhanced, like embossing and enhancing detail on a photograph in photo editing software. The numbers which were showing up as being the most often pressed were 1, 4, 7, and 9. The question was, in what order were the numbers pressed? The number 7 appeared to be the dirtiest number, so I felt that that was probably the number first pressed by people, and they leave the most of their dirt on this number. The 1 was quite dirty as well, so I was going to go for this as the second number. What I was unsure of was whether the code was a 4-digit code or a longer one that happened to just use these 4 digits. I decided that I would assume that the code would be 4 digits, and each digit would be used once. It seemed to me to be more likely that it would be a 4-digit number rather than a 5 or 6-digit number made up of these 4 numbers. Although this was still going to be a guess to gain access, I felt that I'd narrowed down the combination I would need to try to 7149 or 7194. If the alarm did sound after 3 failed combinations, then I felt I should be all right, as I'd only need to try 2. If these didn't work, I wasn't going to try any other combinations, because these 2 were based on logical thinking and problem solving and observation. I had no other observations that would be clear enough for me to be willing to type a third combination in and hope it works. I'd rather find a new plan. I keyed in 7149 and nothing seemed to happen. So I tried 7194. There was a click, followed by a whir, a mechanical sound, as the gates slowly and smoothly opened away from me. It's rare for me to feel a sense of excitement and relief, but the sight of the gates opening when I had a choice of 9 buttons and no idea how long the combination was going to be and whether any numbers were repeated made me feel pleased with myself. I walked confidently through the gate and along the path towards the building. It was important to walk confidently and appear like this was something I did every day of the week, as if I lived here. At the door, I noticed that there were no buzzers. You could just walk in and head straight to the front door of the flat, and each flat appeared to have its own buzzer beside the door. I found my way into Frank's flat and waited for a moment outside the door, listening intently to any sounds coming from the other side. After a few moments, I decided that I couldn't ring his bell and get him to the door to hypnotize him, because I'd be heard by the neighbors, so I began to pick his lock, hoping he was in, but that he didn't hear me break in. I got down on one knee with my lock-picking equipment in hand and started. I focused intently on what was going on inside the lock, listening to the various sounds and almost visualizing what the sounds would look like. And I let these visualizations guide me and help me with the task at hand. After a few moments, the door opened and I quickly got myself inside. It definitely sounded like Frank was home, and it didn't sound like he'd noticed me. I crept slowly and quietly through his house, keeping myself low, glancing in each room as I walked further inside. The second bedroom, the bathroom. I hadn't searched the flat thoroughly, but was confident he was still ahead of me, and not in one of the rooms I'd passed. Then I reached the lounge. I could see the door to the kitchen over on the left. All other doors were off the main corridor. The kitchen door being off the lounge meant that I couldn't check the kitchen without entering the lounge. I slowly edged into the lounge until I could see the back of the sofa and the TV screen. I couldn't tell whether Frank was on the sofa or not. I couldn't hear him and would have to get closer to find out. I also wasn't yet at an angle to see into the kitchen. What I could notice was that the kitchen light was off, so I felt it was less likely that he was in there. I continued to edge closer to the back of the sofa. I tried to enhance my sense of hearing, to hear Frank's breathing, But the TV was so loud that it was difficult to notice whether I was detecting breathing of characters on the TV program or whether some of the breathing sounds came from Frank on the sofa. I was reluctant to get much closer or to stand up and take a look because Frank would notice me. He could have been sat there asleep, in which case he wouldn't notice me, but it was still going to be a risk. I decided to edge right up to the back of the sofa and try to notice any signs of life. Unfortunately, even when I was right against the back of the sofa, I still couldn't tell if Frank was on the sofa or not, as if he was, whether he was awake or asleep. And if he was, whether he was awake or asleep, I rose up slowly to look over the sofa. As I rose up and looked, I noticed that the sofa was empty. I was sure Frank would have been on the sofa. I checked the other rooms, didn't think he would leave the TV on and not be in. I didn't know where he was. I couldn't see a door out to a balcony, but I could see a I could see a door out to a balcony, but the door was made of glass, set with full-length glass windows that spanned the width of the balcony, and the blinds were open. I could see out onto the balcony. It didn't look like he was out there, and the door didn't look like it had been opened for a while. I glanced back at the kitchen. I had totally stood up by this point, out of confusion. I definitely knew he wasn't in the living room. The lights were off in the kitchen, so I couldn't see into the kitchen properly, but it didn't look like he was in there. I wandered over anyhow, and thought I would check in there. I did feel that if he was in there, he would have seen me by now, and I would know about it. I entered the kitchen cautiously, using a self-hypnotic technique of allowing myself to see sound, so that if there were any sounds in the kitchen, I'd get a visual representation of them and notice where they were coming from and what type of sounds they were. This was a technique I used to practice as a teenager with friends, playing manhunt in the woods at night. I'd set my senses to turn unnatural sounds into flashes of coloured light. Unnatural sounds were sounds created by something rather than sounds created naturally by the weather or environment. So wind and rustling leaves didn't show to me, but cracking twigs, breathing, and other noises, most likely made by other people playing manhunt, did show up. Just as I entered the kitchen, I felt a thud across the back of my head. For a moment, my whole world had frozen. Then I felt dazed and fell to the floor with my cheek slapping the kitchen floor, causing me to bite the inside of my mouth. I was annoyed at being surprised. It rarely happens, and this incident made me think that maybe I'd become too complacent in my abilities, leading me to overlook things. I suddenly realized in this moment, when I could taste my iron-rich blood, that there was probably an ensuite toilet in the master bedroom. This was an expensive flat overlooking the Thames after all. I couldn't see who just struck me. All I knew was that I was going to have to manage to turn around and defend myself against the attacker before they strike again. Needing to quickly react to this attack, I quickly turned around to face my attacker, and as I did, I slowed my perception of time to give myself a chance to discover who had attacked me and what with, and to figure out the best course of action to manage this situation. Before I'd even finished turning around, I could already see that it wasn't just one attacker, it was two: Frank Warren and Hugh Fisher. Frank swung a golf club down at me a second time. The first time it had hit me square across the centre of my head, but that time he had an easy shot. He had plenty of time to take aim and strike. This time it wasn't going to be so easy for him. As the club came down towards me, lying on the floor, it was most likely going to hit me in the stomach at the speed I was turning and the speed the club was descending. While I was still in the process of turning, I used my momentum to kick sharply up between Frank's legs. I knew that my foot would make contact with Frank before the club made contact with me, and his reaction would prevent his clean swing. Moments after I made contact with Frank's undercarriage, his knees began to buckle. His elbows instinctively began to recoil back in towards his body, and his face showed anger and pain in almost equal measure. Before Frank had time to finish processing the first strike, I twisted my body back the other way, swinging my other leg round over my body and kicking Frank in the side of his kneecap. Frank now began to topple. His knee gave way as he was still trying to process and react to the first strike. Just behind Frank was Hugh. I jumped to my feet while Frank was still collapsing from his, and struck Hugh in the center of his chest with my left fist. Hugh stumbled and fell backwards, reeling from the punch. This gave me time to fully stand and think about gaining control back over the situation. I don't know where Hugh had been in the flat. Maybe he was in the ensuite with Frank. Maybe there was an ensuite in the other bathroom. Maybe he was in the bedroom and just out of sight when I checked it. Or maybe they heard me at the door picking the lock and both intentionally hid from me until I made myself vulnerable. For me, this last option would be most worrying because it would mean that they could have told anyone that I was here. I didn't hear anyone talking, so I hoped that this wasn't the case. I ran at Hugh to try to grab him. I wasn't really in a position to easily hypnotize either Frank or Hugh, because if I had tried to hypnotize one, then the other would have struck me in the meantime. As I was about to grab Hugh, I felt a painful thud in the lower left-hand side of my back. I turned around to deal with Frank, and as I turned, my face met with the butt of a red fire extinguisher. Luckily, it missed my nose, but caught my right eye, cheek, eye socket, and forehead. I fell down towards the floor again. I slowed time a little, just to see what options were open to me, and which was best. I was going to assassinate both of these people, and I'd come to make both of their deaths look like accidents or natural causes. Unfortunately now, I was unlikely to be able to do that. There'd be a sign in the flat that a struggle took place. Despite what it may have seemed like at the time, I didn't feel the situation was out of my control. I just felt that they were feeling in control. This was fine with me. All this, although uncomfortable, and I hadn't planned to be hit and didn't want to be hit, was only an illusion of control on their part. I was giving myself thinking time to know how I would best handle the situation. Once I hit the floor, Frank jumped onto me and started to punch my face, hurting his own knuckles in the process more than the damage he caused to my face. Just a couple of cuts and bruises. Hugh picked up a freestanding lamp from beside the sofa and tried to bring it down on my face, but I managed to move my face out of the way just before it made contact with me. Hugh lifted the lamp for another attempt at reshaping my face. I looked directly at him and said, "Try really hard not to hit Frank with that when you're trying to hit me." Hugh slammed the lamp down towards me again, which I once again managed to avoid. As he lifted the lamp again, he almost struck Frank accidentally. I looked straight through Hugh's eyes and said, "Really try hard not to, Hugh, hit Frank." Hugh's eyes blinked 3 times in quick succession. I knew this was going well. Hugh tried to strike me again, and again I managed to avoid being struck, but Hugh did nearly hit Frank again. Frank was still punching at me and grabbing at my throat, and I was trying to hold his arms to control how much he was able to harm me. I said to Hugh again, even more authoritatively, "You nearly hit Frank. Can you try harder not to, Hugh, hit Frank? Because you don't want to, Hugh, hurt him." Hugh was now showing clear signs of entering hypnosis and becoming responsive to my covert conversational hypnosis suggestions to hit and injure Frank. When someone's name is used next to the suggestion, it strengthens the suggestion and makes it personal. It can also make it stand out more. This time, when Hugh tried to strike me with the lamp, he swung it at me, and it struck Frank right across his temple, so hard it almost scalped him. His blood splattered seemingly everywhere. It was over the carpet, in the lounge, over me, and all over the walls. I enhanced Hugh's responsivity by saying "that's right," in order to emphasize that he'd just done something correctly. Frank fell off me and onto the floor. He managed to scramble to his knees and turned to face me. I could see the pure white bone of his skull and the clearly visible cracks from the force of the strike. I backed out from underneath Frank. I had to think about what I would do now, because this specific assassination of Frank had become messy. Hugh was here and had been involved. I was going to assassinate Hugh later today, and I was going to make Frank look like he had died naturally. Now, Frank was dazed and injured, but still able to move around and be angry with me. Hugh was hypnotized by and responsive to me. This meant that I could handle Hugh any time I wanted, but he was still covered in Frank's blood. I stood up and stepped back. I was just about to tell Hugh to strike Frank to death with the lamp, when Frank managed to hit Hugh first with the fire extinguisher. Clearly, Frank wasn't happy with Hugh almost taking the top of his head off. If Frank got the upper hand, then I'd have to change plans again. I told Hugh he couldn't feel any pain. He could just stand up and, like a robot, carry out the commands expected of him. Hugh started to stand up. When Frank then struck him a second time, Frank could now clearly notice what I was doing and seemed to be doing what he could to avoid what I wanted to happen. I needed to take control of the situation again and somehow get Frank and Hugh assassinated. I didn't have Frank hypnotized. Whilst Frank was so busy trying to defend himself against Hugh, I managed to walk away from the two of them for a minute. I came back with a golf club. I didn't want to try and strike anyone around the head with it. I didn't feel it would be very successful at this. I didn't feel I would be very successful at this anyway, because there wasn't much room to swing a club when the ceiling was only 7 feet or so high. It would be different if you could have the element of surprise and plan how you can strike in a limited space. What I wanted was the club so that I could take its end off and make it more like a spike. With the club's head removed, I swung it as hard as I could at Frank's right kidney with the intention of rupturing his kidney and causing serious complications that he hopefully wouldn't get help with. I hoped that the spike would cause him serious harm. My plan at this point was to kill him and blame Hugh and kill Hugh afterwards. The spike went straight through Frank's kidney. The bleeding started immediately. I could see his clothes quickly turning red and his face quickly turning white. He then collapsed to the floor and started to gasp for breath. Because of the suggestions given to Hugh, while Frank was dying on the floor, Hugh continued to attack Frank with the lamp, violently striking him repeatedly on the head and face. It didn't take long for Frank to stop moving completely, as his head was fully caved in. His skull was shattered, brains spilling out, and loose eyeballs dangling out of their sockets. Once I knew that Frank was dead, I told Hugh to stop. I was confident that there was probably enough evidence to point the finger at Hugh. The next question was what I should do about Hugh, how I would get rid of him. Hugh stood, blood-covered, in the lounge, with no emotion about what he had done. He probably wouldn't even notice what he had done whilst in hypnosis, because he wouldn't be looking for it. I didn't want to clean anything up. I felt that if I could keep it looking like a murder scene, this would help to keep me out of the picture and someone else in the frame. I decided I'd have Hugh seem to feel guilty, go out onto the balcony and jump. The difficulty was that if Hugh jumped and somehow managed not to hurt himself or only hurt himself a little, I'd be stuck having to find a new way of assassinating him. And depending on the situation, this might end up having to be done in a more public setting. I decided to take the risk, but I wanted Hugh to be more injured when he jumped from the balcony, to increase the chances that he'll die. So I had him go to the kitchen, get a sharp kitchen knife, place that knife in Frank's hand, and stab himself in the stomach with the knife. He duly did so, then sliced sideways, almost as if gutting a fish. Hugh struggled to stand after doing this. I told him then to walk to the balcony and jump. Hugh staggered to the balcony and really struggled to make it. Blood was pouring from his stomach. He kept collapsing to one knee, and he had to try and stand again. He eventually made it to the balcony, but then struggled to get over the wall, to jump or fall to the ground below. It took him about 25 minutes to get outside and jump from this height, 5 floors up. There was a moment's silence as he was falling through the air, before I heard a squelching thud on the ground below. I didn't know how long it would take for someone to discover Hugh's body. I didn't know whether anyone had seen his body falling and may report his death straight away. I didn't even know for sure that he was dead, although I was fairly confident that if he wasn't dead, he was beyond saving. I didn't want to interfere with the scene. As things were, Frank was lying dead on the floor with his hand on the knife which had gutted Hugh. He had a golf club sticking through his body, though unfortunately this had my fingerprints on it. So I cleaned them off. Hugh wasn't wearing gloves, so the golf club being wiped clean may lead to suspicions. Hugh's finger and handprints would be all over the lamp. The base of the lamp had the remains of Frank's head on it, and Frank's injuries were consistent with Hugh attacking him violently. There was no clear motive, but if someone found out they were all going to make a substantial amount of money, then this could well appear to be the motive behind the killing. I tried to leave the flat as stealthily as I could without leaving any footprints or additional evidence. I may already have left some blood from biting my mouth, and was sure I would have left some other evidence. How thoroughly the police check the crime scene would depend on how quickly they formulate their conclusions. If they thought through to a result quickly, they'd be less likely to analyse and look for more evidence. My next challenge was actually going to be to clean myself up. I didn't want to use any of the sinks in Frank's place because it would leave evidence. There was also the risk that the police could arrive soon, and they'd then catch me in the flat, which wouldn't go down well. They'd suspect me straight away, and I'd have to deal with them by influencing them. I rushed out of the flat, down the stairs, left through the front door to the building, and out into the garden. I confidently left through the front gate and wanted to find a way around to the other side of the property so that I could clean myself up somewhere out of view. I decided that although the Thames was far from clean, it was still water and may clean me up enough to look presentable. Eventually, I found a path down to the Thames, washed my face and arms. I needed to pop in somewhere to buy some more clothes, or to head back to my hotel room to get changed before heading out again. There was no quick, simple, and inconspicuous way to get back to the hotel. I'd be seen. So I decided that I'd head into a nearby charity shop. It was nearly 5 p.m, so I knew that once I had passed on the way to Frank's flat, so I knew that the one I had passed on the way to Frank's flat was still open for another hour or so. I turned my trousers and jumper inside out. I didn't want the blood splatters to show, and I had bruising on my face. I'd used self-hypnosis to reduce the bruising, but I'd been too busy to work on reducing the wounds more fully. I thought I'd rather be judged for wearing clothes inside out than have the blood commented on. I picked up a second-hand pair of jeans and a jumper, went to some nearby public toilets, changed into my new clothes. I put the old blood-stained clothes in the charity shop carrier bag, took them away with me, and found a quiet alleyway where I set fire to them. I stayed with the burning clothes until they'd fully burned and were virtually ashes. Then I took the ashes back to the Thames and threw them into the river. I took the plastic bag away with me again and threw it in a bin down a street. Quite a walk from Frank's flat, on the way to the next person I needed to assassinate. Carolyn Bowers was my next target. Having just had my last experience where things didn't go quite according to plan, I hoped that there wouldn't be any more complications. One aspect of all these assassinations was that they had had less planning than perhaps I would have liked. I hadn't been able to take the time tailing and observing people. I was meeting them for the first time when I arrived to assassinate them. I did know something about them from their details I'd looked up on the Silo intranet, but I didn't really know much else. It was now approaching 6:30 p.m, which had the potential to make it more difficult when I was out in the taxi. The easiest way to get around was on foot where possible. The underground was too crowded to really want to travel by train. I didn't know the bus routes well enough to want to jump on a bus, and taxis would barely move in the traffic. I decided I'd grab a blue Boris bike. This was going to be an easy cycle ride, though. The wind had been picking up. This wasn't going to be an easy cycle ride, though. The wind had been picking up through the afternoon, and now stabbing torrential sheets of rain were falling, cutting through the sky and through my clothes. Everything beyond just a few meters was a blur. I tried to cycle through the rain, having to wipe my eyes clear every few moments, and trying to hold the bike steady each time there was a blast of the crosswind. Eventually, I managed to get to Caroline's home. I was soaked through. My trousers were stuck to my legs, restricting movement, and my top was wrapped awkwardly around my arms and stuck to my arms and body. It was going to be difficult to make quick moves if I needed to, but I had to get the job done. There was nowhere I could go to dry out quickly. I noticed a pub just down the street from Caroline's house and decided to get in there and see if I could dry out a little bit. I went into the pub and into the men's toilets. Luckily, they had hand dryers with a button to push to turn them on. So I stood up close to the dryer, turned it on, and tried to dry off my trousers first. I did 2 rounds of drying before then pushing the button and pointing the dryer head upwards, covering it with my top so that it would blow hot air, so the hot air was puffing up and drying it. After drying myself off enough for my clothes to no longer stick to my body, I knew I was going to have to go back outside in the rain and would inevitably get wetter again. All my drying would have been in vain. I grabbed a drink at the bar and went to sit in the corner, looking across the pub. It wasn't particularly busy, despite the fact that it was approaching dinner time. When people often go out for meals in such pubs. A few people had umbrellas propped up or hanging on the backs of their chairs. They're obviously far more prepared for the weather than I was, but then I didn't know at the beginning of the day what the day would hold, and initially hadn't known that I'd have to rush around all day around the city of London by any means, assassinating so many people. When I saw a group of people preparing to leave the pub, I decided I would use them as a way to borrow an umbrella. They stood up and started getting their coats and scarves on, and as they did this, they continued to chat and laugh with each other. There were 8 of them getting up to leave the table. I had to time it just right to blend in with them. As they showed signs of being about to walk toward the exit, I stood up and headed toward them to blend in. I caught up with them at the table just as they were beginning to walk out. I wanted to do this carefully, so that observers would just think I was one of the group. I hoped that the group would not notice me, but if they did, I hoped they'd just think I was exiting the pub at the same time as them. And because they were chatting and walking slowly, they would assume I was just being held up a little bit by them. As the group and I passed the tables on the way to the exit, I noticed a full-length umbrella hanging on the back of a chair. I grabbed it without looking at it or drawing any attention to what I was doing. I made it look like my arm was naturally swinging beside me with my step, hoping no one would notice the action as I swiped it up in a single motion. I then continued to follow the group out of the front of the pub, put the umbrella up, and dashed off into the curtain of rain. Caroline lived in a detached house with a small garden circling around it. There was a hedge running about 8 meters in front of the house that was about a meter high. In front of the hedge was a low brick wall with an iron fence painted black on top of the wall, and a black single iron gate leading to a gravel path that led through the lawn to the front door. I didn't think that I'd be heard walking to the front door because the heavy rain was loud enough to drown out any sounds I'd likely make. I also felt it was unlikely that I'd be seen given the quantity of water that was gushing from the sky. From the street, I couldn't see the house. I could only notice that it looked like there was at least one light on downstairs and one light on upstairs in the house. I opened the creaking gate, walked into the garden, closing the gate behind me. The rain weighed heavily on the umbrella. It was coming down with such intense force that it was becoming difficult to hold the umbrella up in the rain. I didn't bother to try to hide or be inconspicuous when I walked up to the house because I suspected no one would be able to see me. Even if they were looking outside, the weather was so bad, I didn't imagine anyone would be looking out. I didn't imagine anyone would be looking. It was the kind of weather that encourages people to close their curtains, turn down the lights, and wrap up warm in front of a fire. At the house, I decided to walk around the whole perimeter of the property. I knew this would leave my footprints around the whole house, but I felt that there was going to be so much rain coming down with such force that any footprints would be washed away by morning. The thing I felt I needed to watch out for was when I entered the house. With all the mud, I felt that it was likely I'd tread footprints into the house. After walking all the way around the house, I decided that the best way in was through a small window upstairs at the back. The window looked like it led into a bathroom. There was the window ledge of the downstairs windows and a ledge above the back door that I could climb on to help me get to the upstairs window. In all of this rain, it wasn't going to be easy to get onto the window without slipping. But I was hopeful that I could manage it. The larger lower bathroom window was closed, and the small bathroom window that opened upwards was open a little, probably to just keep a little air flowing into the bathroom. There were no lights on in the room, so I was confident no one was in there. I needed to get to the bathroom window ledge, lean into the small window, open the larger window so that I could enter the building through that larger window. I hooked the umbrella onto the back of my trousers. I was going to get wet without it, but would not be able to climb if I was holding it. I climbed onto the downstairs window ledge, reaching up and over to the ledge above the back door. Grasping the ledge and leaning my other hand against the wall, I climbed up onto that ledge above the door. I struggled to get a footing. The walls were slippery, so my feet kept slipping down. I had one foot trying to push on the wall up the side of the back door, my other foot trying to push on the wall by the window. Eventually, I managed to get footing and get onto the ledge above the door. From there, I leant my whole body into the wall as flat as I could and stepped sideways over to the bathroom window ledge, stretching out my left hand and trying to grasp the edge of the window with my fingertips to pull myself over to gain access to the small open window. I focused all of my energy into my fingertips to hold my weight as I pushed myself along the wall to the window. At the window, I reached in, twisting my arm and stretching to grasp the handle for the window and pulled it upwards. It opened out on me, almost knocking me off the ledge. I pushed back on the window with the weight of my body, before then shifting my body to the edge of the ledge and reaching in with my left hand. As I opened the window wide enough for me to step through and into the bathroom, I rapidly dilated my pupils to let more light in to see as clearly as I could in the bathroom. If I tried to acclimatize to the dark, I probably would have to fully step into the bathroom and wait for a while for my eyes to adjust. So dilating my eyes myself was much quicker and more efficient. The other side of the window was a wash basin, so I had to jump over the basin and onto the bathroom floor, trying not to make a sound. Inside the house was much quieter than outside. There was already a risk that the increased noise from opening the window in the bathroom could have been noticed by anyone in the house, so I wanted to be careful to try not to make a sound. I jumped down onto the floor, bending my legs like shock absorbers to dissipate the impact and the noise. Once I landed, I turned around to close the window behind me, instantly plunging the house into silence. Light filtered through the house from elsewhere, arriving just strongly enough to add a slight glow into the bathroom. I noticed that the floor in the bathroom was tiled. There were no rugs or mats down on the floor, so my dirty, muddy footprints were easy to clean with some toilet tissue. I also cleaned the muddy footprints on the windowsill and used the toilet paper to dry my shoes. This all used quite a lot of toilet paper. It could have looked suspicious if anyone looked around the house following the death of Carolyn. I made myself a mental note to remember to come back to the bathroom to flush the toilet paper before I left, so as to leave no trace that I was here. I didn't want to make the same mistake that I'd made last time I searched a house. Before I walked out of the bathroom, I closed my eyes and relaxed into a deep state of hypnosis. I then focused on my surroundings, noticing sound, and allowing my unconscious mind to convert even the smallest sound into a visual representation of the house I was in and any other occupants. My unconscious mind showed me someone sleeping in a room 2 doors down. It looked like a child. My unconscious was noticing their breathing, with 2 people sitting there, and no one else anywhere in the house. I slowly ventured out of the bathroom and into the upstairs corridor, careful not to make any noise. I didn't know who was sleeping in the upstairs room, but from the look of the bedroom door, I suspected it was a young girl, no older than 4 or 5. I crept slowly past the bedroom door and on to the landing. I looked over the banisters at the top of the landing. I couldn't see much. There was a light on in the hallway, at the bottom of the stairs, and another in the living room. I could hear the television on in the lounge, and thought to myself, hopefully the TV would drown out any noise I happened to make as I headed downstairs. I walked slowly and carefully down the stairs, stood the other side of the half-open door to the lounge. I got the umbrella from behind me and placed it gently on the floor. I didn't want it getting in the way. I waited behind the lounge door and listened for a moment before lowering to the ground to sneak into the room. I was aware that there were 2 people in the room and that I'd probably have to eliminate them both. Crouched down, I moved as quickly and quietly as I could to the back of the sofa. It wasn't that long ago when I was in a very similar position to this. This time, though, I was sure somebody or 2 people were on the sofa. I didn't have a solid plan of what I was going to do. But my plan was to just be more direct, even if they attacked me. As I rested my back against the sofa, I heard 2 rapid, back-to-back pshk sounds. Almost straight away, I felt a stinging pain in my side and saw a dining room table leg splinter. I knew I'd just been shot twice in quick succession, but still put my right hand down to feel it. I could feel the warm, moist feeling of blood seeping from my body and the stinging and aching pain of the wounds. I looked down and noticed my clothes rapidly turning red as they soaked up my blood. I entered hypnosis, focused on slowing down my perception of time. I made time almost grind to a halt. This released all the pain I had at the beginning to feel. It also gave me thinking time. The first thing I did with this opportunity, but to stop the blood flow before it exited my body. There are many cases where people have been operated on under hypnosis as only anaesthetic, and surgeons have asked the patient to bleed just enough to watch the area out a little, and to then stop the blood flow. I was just doing this, but to an advanced level. I focused on relieving the pain, stopping the excessive blood flow, and healing the injured parts while I still had time running slowly. This was so that all these would be in place once I rejoined normal time again. When I was ready, I returned to real time. Now was time to find out whoever was on the other side of the sofa. Find out how whoever was on the other side of the sofa knew I was coming, and to take them out. Edging up from the floor, I gently rose to my feet. I still had my back to whomever had the gun. They were on or behind the sofa, so I knew they would also have to be rising to their feet. I turned around to face over the sofa, to respond to whatever was about to face me. When I heard another chk and felt another stinging pain, this time in my right shoulder, I stumbled back down to the floor and looked up at the person who shot me 3 times now. It was Carolyn. She was stood in front of the sofa, holding a gun in 2 hands out in front of her, pointing it in my direction. Stood next to her was Julian Palmer, another of the people I was due to assassinate. Carolyn could have shot me again, or gotten a better shot off and killed me, but she didn't. Clearly, she wanted to know something from me before doing that. She was obviously prepared for my arrival, because she had used a silencer on the gun, although she probably didn't need to, given the weather outside. She could have fired a cannon at me in here, and it probably wouldn't have been heard outside over the sound of the rain and wind. "Get in that corner now, or I'll shoot again," Carolyn said aggressively. I did as she asked and backed into the corner. I'd stopped the bleeding from my latest wound and tackled the pain, but I tried not to give this away. I continued to act as injured and as vulnerable as I could. "Who the fuck are you, and why are you trying to kill us?" Carolyn clearly wanted to sound in charge of the situation, so I thought the best course of action was to let her do so. I was injured. Having 3 bullet wounds is serious, and my life was at risk, but not at quite as much risk as it appeared. "I'm Graham. I'm really sorry I broke into your house. I just needed to get some dry clothes. I don't have much money. I got caught in the rain and needed to get dry and changed. Look, I just want an ambulance called, and I want to get out of here." I tried to sound scared and helpless, but Carolyn didn't buy it. "You're fucking lying to me." She got right into my face with the gun, waving it threateningly, as if that would get me to talk. "You went to see Hugh. He called me to say someone was at his flat picking his lock. Why did you see Hugh? What are you after?" It didn't sound like she knew that I'd killed Hugh, or the others for that matter. Carolyn pointed the gun at my right leg and pulled the trigger. A puff of blood sprayed up from my leg as the bullet impacted. It was unusual to see damage done when the gun just made a slight odd popping sound, almost as if it had no power. I recoiled in pain and grimaced. Like with the other wounds, I removed the pain with hypnosis, controlled the blood flow, and began the healing process. It may sound like I could do all of this, so I must have been all right. The reality is that all of this makes my body less efficient. If you have an injury that makes a part of the body weak, that part of the body is weak whether you feel the pain there or not. Fucking tell me who you are, why you saw Hugh, and what you're doing, and what you're after, or the next shot will be in your balls. I didn't doubt her for 1 second. I believed she would do it. I was curious whether Julian had any balls. He hadn't said anything. He just seemed to have remained hidden behind Carolyn the whole time so far. "I'm Kit," I told Carolyn. "I look into things like a private detective. I was asked to investigate you and a group of others over possible fraud or misuse of business links and confidential knowledge. I didn't want to reveal my real name or my real reason, but had to give Carolyn something plausible." Carolyn seemed to believe what I had said, probably because she was, in fact, misusing business links and confidential knowledge. She probably thought that someone somewhere picked up on this back at Silo and reported it. She didn't seem to realize that I knew about the nuclear weapon or the nuclear technology deal that was supposed to happen soon. Carolyn told Julian to tie me up and gag me while she contacted the others and got them around to her house. He compliantly grabbed me and forced me to turn over before then tying my wrists and my feet together and stuffing a woolen glove in my mouth and wrapping duct tape around my mouth and head to hold the glove in place. Now I wasn't being shot at. I felt I could begin to try to manipulate myself out of the situation. I didn't know what Carolyn was going to find when she phoned everyone on the list. Was she going to telephone Rawlins, or just the others? I could only wait and see what developed. Carolyn came back after about 10 minutes to say to Julian that she had only been able to make contact with Aaron. She told Julian that he was going to set off shortly to come around here. I heard a noise from upstairs. It sounded like the little girl was awake. Perhaps it was the storm that woke her, or maybe she'd heard the commotion downstairs. Carolyn sounded like a different person when she responded with such love and kindness to her daughter, asking for her mummy. Julian remained downstairs, keeping an eye on me and making sure I didn't do anything stupid. I didn't know what they thought I was going to do, but I knew that things I can do weren't likely to have been in their thoughts. Julian sat perched on the edge of the sofa facing me, not talking. I started to match Julian's breathing and began to guide him into hypnosis. His eyes began to flicker as the hypnotic state took hold. Being gagged and bound wasn't enough to stop me being able to use these techniques. I implanted the thought in Julian's mind: I'm going to go to the kitchen and take a large knife and stab it deep into my stomach as hard as I can with 2 hands. Then I'll pull the knife upwards until it hits my rib cage, and I'll stay where I am quietly, and I'll do that now. Julian then nodded very slowly in a hypnotic way before taking himself off to the kitchen. I closed my eyes to enhance my hearing and listened intently to the sounds from the kitchen. I heard a drawer open and a thin metal object being removed from the drawer. It sounded like he'd picked up a knife. I then heard the sound of the knife penetrating his body, then the ripping sound as the knife tore upwards through his body and clothes, with the splatting and dripping sound of internal organs and liquid from within the body falling out of his body and hitting the floor. I imagined there was probably quite a mess in the kitchen. After a couple of moments, I heard the knife fall to the floor, and then a thud as Julian collapsed to his knees, and second thud as he fell forward, toppling over dead. All I had to do now was deal with Carolyn, and if Aaron arrived, him too. Carolyn didn't come downstairs for about 15 minutes, and when she did eventually come downstairs, she came straight into the living room with me. I looked up at her and began to look through her. I needed to get myself untied, so I looked through Carolyn and began to put myself into hypnosis. I also matched Carolyn's breathing. Before I managed to complete a connection with her, she became curious about where Julian was and why he wasn't in here with me. She aggressively asked me where he was and obviously couldn't get an answer because I was gagged. She probably also assumed I couldn't have done anything because of being tied up. She walked out of the room to search for him. After just a few moments, I heard her scream from the kitchen. I assumed she'd found Julian. Carolyn ran back into the lounge, ran up to me, ripped off the duct tape, pulled the glove out of my mouth. She demanded to know what had happened to Julian. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about. I told her he'd walked off. I'd been sat here the whole time tied up and so couldn't have anything to do with whatever has happened to him. Carolyn didn't believe me. She went back to the kitchen to look at Julian again. It was as if she couldn't believe her eyes, and so she had to double check to see if he actually was dead. When she came back into the lounge, she sat on a dining room chair. These were the nearest chairs to the door. She slumped down with her head in her hands and cried. While she was crying and staying in one location, I took the opportunity to hypnotize her too. I matched her breathing and began to put myself into a state of hypnosis. I noticed that Carolyn was beginning to change her posture and her responses. She was beginning to stop crying and started to act more calmly as the hypnosis took her over. Once I noticed that she appeared to be in hypnosis, I told her to come and untie my wrists and legs. Carolyn came over to me and did my bidding. I was now back in control of the situation. I had injuries which made certain parts of my body weak, and I was going to have to get these injuries checked out medically. But I was physically free and able to communicate ideas clearer again through my body language, breathing, and talking. I had to assassinate Carolyn. The question was, how was I going to do it? I now knew that Carolyn had a daughter. I didn't really want to harm the child or to make the child motherless. Unfortunately, we as assassins sometimes have to make really tough decisions, and we sometimes have to do things we don't feel comfortable with because they're for the greater good. We're taught as hypnotic assassins that one can be sacrificed for the many. I stood up and hobbled over to the sofa. I could see the blood from my injuries by the sofa and wondered whether Carolyn had planned that far ahead, because if she had killed me, she'd have left blood everywhere. She would have had to clean up thoroughly to prevent anyone being suspicious or finding any evidence that someone had been harmed here. From the sofa, I told Carolyn that in a minute she would see me open my hand and gesture my open hand out in front of me. I would then very slowly close my hand and tense my hand, and as I did so, she would notice that her heart would close and feel crushed until it stopped beating. I told Carolyn to look intently at my hand as I put it out, palm up, in front of me. I then tensed up and closed my hand, taking a couple of minutes. As I closed it, Carolyn grasped at her chest. She struggled to breathe and was gasping. I continued to crush, and I could notice the veins and arteries in her neck, face, and head becoming more prominent. Her skin color changed as blood flow was redirected away from the skin towards her vital organs in a vain attempt to save her life. It was all a waste of time, though. She was going to be dead very soon, and there was nothing she could do to prevent that. Carolyn collapsed to the floor, still clutching at her chest, just as her 5-year-old daughter ran in and up to her mummy. "Mummy, mummy," the girl cried out with tears in her eyes as she ran over and hugged her mother. "Mummy, mummy," she tried to shake her mum better. "Please, mummy, wake up, mummy." Carolyn was unresponsive to any amount of shaking. She just lay there motionless with her eyes staring up towards the ceiling. Carolyn's daughter wrapped her innocent little arms around her mummy's dead body, almost as if she was hoping that the unconditional love from a daughter to a mummy would bring her back. But it didn't make any difference. Carolyn continued to lay there motionless. I tried to comfort Carolyn's daughter and tried to hypnotize her. However, every time she began to respond, she would change her breathing to prevent herself from being hypnotized in this way. Instead, I had to hypnotize her by talking to her and focusing her attention. This was probably one of the lowest points of my life, watching a child crying and asking her mummy to wake up while her mother lay there dead because of me. Once the girl was in hypnosis, I spoke to her, giving her unlockable amnesia of the event. I told her that once she had a new mummy and daddy, they would automatically be seen as if they had always had these roles. All the memories of the real mummy and daddy would seem like they were the same mummy and daddy, and the new parents as the new parents. This was to help her to remember a string of positive memories rather than remembering her original parents and what had happened to them. I told the girl under hypnosis that she would be a highly intelligent, healthy, and happy person. I wanted to give her some post-hypnotic suggestions to last a lifetime and positively impact on her future. Nothing before or since has compared to how difficult that last situation was to carry out. I've left children without parents and parents without children before, but I've never left a child when they've watched their parent die and had to then watch the repercussions of my actions on others. I now needed to track down Aaron Cannon. I knew he was probably on his way to Carolyn's house. So the most logical option was to wait for him to come to me and then handle it, rather than go chasing after him and struggling to find him. I decided to leave the home and take the girl with me. Firstly, I went up to the bathroom, flushed the toilet paper to get rid of all the toilet paper evidence. I then made sure the girl was dressed appropriately and grabbed the umbrella I'd left downstairs by the wall next to the lounge door. The girl was in hypnosis, which meant that she was very compliant with me and very calm and well behaved. I walked her out of the house and down the road a little way until we came to a narrow one-way street, which led to the garages of the houses along the road we just turned off. I was hunting for the garage of Carolyn's house. After searching for about 15 minutes, we finally stood outside the garage. I broke the lock on the door and opened it. Luckily, there was a car inside. I took out one of the bits of wire from the umbrella frame to break into the car. After prizing the car door open, I told the girl to sit herself in the back seat, close her eyes, and fall deeply and comfortably asleep. She followed these instructions to the letter. I closed the car door, fixed the umbrella, closed the garage door, and then headed back to the house. I knew that Aaron would be heading to the house, so I waited to be there to meet him when he arrived. I entered and waited in the lounge for his arrival. Whilst I was waiting in the lounge, I allowed myself to drift off inside my mind. I needed to get a sense of calm and peace, and I needed to scan through my body and check on my own internal healing. Pain is often a signal telling someone to look after that part of themselves, because there's an injury. So by getting rid of the pain and carrying on, I was also running the risk of increasing injury to myself. So it was important that I took this time, while it was safe to do so, to check out my injuries and any pain, and check that it's all right to continue to manage the pain. I told my unconscious mind to continue to monitor the surroundings and any changes that occurred, and to alert me to be fully awake and refreshed and ready to handle anything if I needed. I then felt safe to drift deep into my unconscious mind. Like most of the time when I enter hypnosis, I distort my perception of time so that for every minute of real world time that passes, a few hours of deep unconscious time pass. As well as scanning through my mind and body for injuries and areas that needed healing, I also focused on reviewing the assassinations during this mission so far, to review what I'd done and what I could have done better. And I looked at what my plans would be for finishing Rawlins off. I had to think about whether to plan things in detail or to play it by ear when I got back to him tomorrow. While all of this work was taking place, my conscious mind was just aware of me flying like an eagle, flying peacefully over the Great Lakes, trees, mountains, and a little wooden cabin. I was aware of the peace and tranquility of the experience and received the message in my mind to remember to sometimes rise above situations and get a different perspective or view. I may need this. As my eyes opened and I exited hypnosis, I heard a knock at the door. It was Aaron. I'd hoped that he was going to arrive and let himself into the house. I went to the door with the intention of throwing it open in his surprise at throwing it open, and in his surprise at seeing me, I'd use that state to hypnotize him. As I went to throw the door open, Aaron kicked it open from the outside. The door struck me, and I fell to the floor. I wasn't expecting that. It took me a moment to recover. While I was trying to recover, Aaron saw me on the floor. He strode over, grabbed me by the collar, lifted me up and throwing me out of the door into the front garden. I staggered up off the lawn to see Aaron coming at me with a hat stand that had been standing just the other side of the front door. Aaron was a large man, at least 6'6", and almost as wide as the door frame. As the hat stand was being swung down at me, I pulled the umbrella out from behind me, swinging it at the hat stand. I made contact and deflected the hat stand down past me and onto the ground. I then struck Aaron's arms by his wrists with the umbrella in order to break his grip of the stand. The stand fell to the floor and Aaron came at me with his hands. He grabbed me around the throat with both hands and began to choke and crush my throat and throttle me. I reached up above his grasp, taking hold of his forearms from above, with my palms facing outwards, my elbows up high, so that once I circled my elbows round back to my sides, it released his grip. I then used my left hand inside his right arm. I then used my left hand to let go and punch in the direct line to Aaron's chest, striking just inside his right arm. Then as I began retracting my left fist, I struck a second time with my right fist and tripped him to the floor. I stepped towards him. Aaron was tenacious. He kept on coming. He just stood up, and almost immediately he threw a barrage of punches at my face. I blocked and parried each punch, and once I saw an opening, I punched or kicked back. I was hoping that our fight would continue to remain near the house, or even inside. The rain was still torrential, so visibility was very poor, and it made it much harder to fight. Eventually, Aaron stopped coming at me, long enough that I could get inside the house again. Aaron followed me in and continued to try to attack me. I knew that as soon as I had the opportunity, I had to end this. I needed to stop Aaron. I started to try to match his breathing, but I was also busy trying to dodge his punches and kicks that I couldn't match his breathing long enough. I tried to talk him into hypnosis, but I couldn't get enough words out before I'd have to get a fist in the face and have to react to this rather than continuing to speak. Inside the house, I decided I needed to get something between me and Aaron to slow him down, like a sofa or dining room table. My injuries began to have an impact on how well I was able to do. I noticed that I'd started bleeding again from my side. I still didn't know how serious my wounds were and what internal damage had been done. I was beginning to feel slightly dizzy and faint, but had to hold it together. I got myself to the other side of the sofa to Aaron, knowing that if I could keep the sofa between us for 10 seconds or so, I could use this time to hypnotize him. The short period of time I was out of punching range of Aaron wasn't enough time to hypnotize him with a breathing technique, and wasn't enough time to hypnotize him by talking to him. But what it was, though, was enough time to give me the opportunity to set up a way of focusing Aaron's attention and turning that focus of attention into a hypnotic induction. I kept opposite Aaron, around the other side of the sofa, noticing his frustration building as he would try to run around one side, but I'd slip around the sofa to remain opposite him. Then he'd try and run around the other side, and I'd do the same again. I waited for Aaron to turn again. This time, I turned towards him, running at him, and once I reached him, he began to throw a punch at me. I struck his forehead with the heel of my hand, and in Aaron's moment of shock, I authoritatively shouted the word sleep as he fell to the floor. I noticed that Aaron's body went loose and limp, and his eyes closed in the second or so that it took him to go from standing to lying deep asleep in hypnosis on the living room floor. Once he'd landed on the ground, I continued, "That's right. As you continue to sleep deeply and comfortably, you can hear the sound of my voice, and you'll respond fully and honestly to the sound of my voice, and find responding to the sound of my voice compelling and uncontrollable." Aaron remained motionless on the floor in a deep state of hypnosis, while I took a moment to sit down and catch my breath. Today had been a very busy day, and I felt that my injuries weren't just flesh wounds. They needed to be looked at by a doctor. I managed to slow the bleeding and remove the pain for now, and began the healing process. But all of this was only going to help for a short while. It was just a measure to try and prevent them from getting worse. After taking a few moments to catch my breath, I told Aaron that we were going for a walk, and he was to follow me out of the house. We left the house, closing the door behind us, and walked down the street towards a busier part of London. I told Aaron I would go and sit on a bench, and that we could see further down the street, and that once I was sitting down, he was to walk along the street and then stop breathing. I told him that the harder he tried to breathe, the less air he could inhale. I explained that he'd find himself in a place in his mind so pleasant and peaceful that he'd stop being aware of his body and the outside world. He'd be totally absorbed in his inner world. Aaron walked along the street after I'd sat on the bench, and then stopped breathing. He collapsed onto the pavement. People ran over to him to try and help. They undid his collar, and once he'd passed out, they tried mouth to mouth. They called for an ambulance, but I knew all of it was going to be in vain. I sat and watched the scene unfolding as Aaron left this world and drifted into his own. Once Aaron was covered by the ambulance crew, I stood up and went back to my hotel room to clean myself off before heading for Rawlins tomorrow, first thing in the morning. I walked to the car that Carolyn's daughter was in and led her to the front of a small police station, dropping her off there. I hoped that she would be fine and promised myself that I would check up on her regularly to make sure she grew up well. I then made the rest of my journey back to the hotel room. Once I woke up the next morning, I got myself ready early, bandaged up my wounds with the intention that I'd go and get them looked at by a doctor later after finishing my assignment, and headed out of the hotel over to Silo's offices. This time, I had my own genuine ID, so I wore this and walked straight past the security at the front gate, past the security at the front desk in the building, and headed to the lift to go straight up to the 43rd floor. I pressed for the lift to come down to the ground floor and then waited. After a few moments, the lift arrived. I got into the lift alone and pressed the 43 button twice. The doors closed, and I looked up at the security cameras and said, "I'm coming up to see Michael Rawlins." I trusted that one or both of the security guards I had hypnotized would be watching the monitor and would accept what I say, and just let me up to the top floor. The lift rose up through the floors. I watched the numbers passing by on the screen above the door. At floor 7, the ascent stopped, and a couple of Silo staff entered the lift, engaged in conversation. I stood back in the corner to avoid drawing any attention to myself. I didn't want to have anyone engaging me in conversation or asking me what I did or which floor I worked on. 2 floors up, and another person got in the lift. I thought to myself maybe I should have picked up a book or a newspaper so that I had something to look at to avoid being drawn into conversations. At the 14th floor, the individual who had just got in exited the lift. The couple exited the lift at the 22nd floor. But then Toby entered the lift at the 23rd floor and pushed the button to go up to the 27th. I was glad to see that Toby was in the office today. He didn't see me when he got in the lift. At the 25th floor, 5 more people entered the lift, chatting to each other. Toby said hello to them, and one of them asked how he was. Toby was now also involved in the conversation. They all exited the lift together on the 27th floor. They were discussing, not knowing why they'd been asked to attend an emergency staff meeting. I wondered whether it was to do with any of the people I assassinated yesterday. They all had records of working with Silo, so some of them may have had specific staff roles, and others may have just been on the board of directors. I was curious about the staff meeting and tempted to attend, but I had to meet with Rawlins, and someone in the meeting may wonder who I was and question me because they didn't recognize me. I decided it was best to stay on task and continue with my job that I was supposed to be doing. No one else entered the lift until the 39th floor. I'd just been thinking about how I was nearly there. When it stopped, the doors opened, someone got in the lift saying good morning to me. I replied with morning, not wanting to engage in conversation. So I avoided asking how he was. It always surprises me how often people say good morning, how are you, when they don't actually care how the person is, they're just being polite. This person clearly wanted to open up a conversation. He was only going up a couple of floors, but seemed to be uncomfortable with the silence between us. I did my best to keep any talking to single words. The man got out of the lift at the 41st floor. He'd probably go away and tell everyone this rude member of staff in the lift, and would probably assume that I was arrogant because I was silent and barely talking. I was now finally nearly there. No one else entered the lift, which continued up to the 43rd floor, where the doors opened, and I walked out of the lift over to the security desk. The security guards didn't see me. I was still invisible to them. They seemed confused to see the lift open and no one coming out of it. When I pushed the button, they saw inside the lift, but didn't see anyone there to have pushed the button. So they'd consciously assumed that someone had done it accidentally and then exited the lift straight away, or that it was a fault. One of the security men walked over cautiously to the lift, with one hand resting on his gun, in case he needed it. He looked in the lift, couldn't see anyone there, and relayed that to the other security guard. He waited by the lift until the doors shut and it began to descend. Once it started to go back down, he knew that it could only come back to the floor if someone pressed the 43 button twice again. The other security guard now stopped looking over towards his colleague, who had just been over to the lift, and began to look at his security monitor. He looked down at the monitor and then up in front of him at the security desk, then down at the monitor again, then back up. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Ben, look. The monitor. What do you see?" he said, confused. "Shit, it looks like there's someone stood at the desk with us." "But there isn't." Ben waved his arms slowly whilst looking at the security monitor to check he was viewing real-time footage. "Who the fuck is it?" Ben said, pulling his gun out from its holster and pointing it right at my head, keeping one eye on the monitor and one eye gazing around the room trying to see who was there. "Put the gun down and both close your eyes and sleep deeply now," I commanded. Ben lowered his gun, put it on the security desk, and they both closed their eyes and entered deep state of hypnosis. I walked around the security desk, accessed the computer, where I went to the security files and deleted all security footage from the last 2 days, and then turned the cameras off so that nothing else would be filmed until I was long gone. I told the security staff that they would turn the security cameras back on when they came into work the following morning. The security staff remained stationary and in deep hypnosis as I walked to Rawlins' room at the back of the floor. I opened the door expecting to find Rawlins in the office, but his office was empty. I went back out to the security desk and asked the staff where Rawlins was. They informed me this morning he decided not to come into work. He took the morning off to get ready to go to Paris and would soon be heading to St Pancras train station to leave for France on the Eurostar. I was really annoyed. I now had to get across London to St Pancras train station to find Rawlins and hope I could get to him before he boarded the train. I was glad I'd given him a fear to stop him from boarding the train. The only difficulty was that he may have been someone who feels the fear but does things anyway. I was also annoyed that the lift stopped and started, taking ages to get to the 43rd floor. It would take just as long to get to the ground floor again. I wasn't fit enough right now with my injuries to sprint down the stairs, so all I could do was take the lift down and hope that it went down quickly. I entered the lift and pushed the button for the ground floor. It felt like it was going down so painfully slowly when I had somewhere to get to. If I was in charge of the company, I would want an office on the ground floor. It would have been better than the top floor. If it's all about the view, I would just buy one of those new 4K TVs and put a 4K HD camera on the roof, facing out over London, and have the camera streaming live to my TV. At least then I could feel like I was on the top floor and have the view, but the convenience of not having far to walk to get to my office, being able to easily exit in the event of a fire, and not having long trips up and down in the lift. Once the lift reached the ground floor, I walked briskly out past the front security desk. They were trying to figure out the security feeds and why all the cameras seemed to have just turned off. I'd used the master controls on the top floor, so they would struggle to do anything about it downstairs. They'd have to communicate with security up on the 43rd floor, who'd been told that the cameras wouldn't be turned on until tomorrow morning. I exited the building, ran to the nearest tube station. I didn't know exactly when Rawlins would be leaving on the train from St Pancras, but I knew I wanted to get there as quickly as possible, so as to have as much time as possible to deal with Rawlins. I purchased myself a day ticket for travel around London, ran through the barriers, down the escalators to the underground platform. Like usual, trains ran every 1 or 2 minutes, so I didn't have long to wait before one rattled into the station. I pushed onto the train and remained standing by the doors, holding the handrail for support. My wounds started to hurt. It felt like a sign telling me I shouldn't have run. The wounds in my kidney area felt damp. I put my hand under my shirt and felt the dressing. It was wet, so the wounds had been bleeding more again. I focused on reducing the blood flow to the area again. The difficulty was that if I totally stopped blood flow, then the cells in the area of my body would just die. Like when you get frostbite and blood flows away from very cold extraction. I disembarked as quickly as I could before running and pushing my way through people to get out of the underground part of the train station. Once I was out of the underground, I had to find the Eurostar terminus. I'd never been to this station before, so I slowed down my perception of time to allow myself to search and to read the various signs and notices. Not only did I need to find the Eurostar train, but I also needed to find what the train times were and work out which one Rawlins was likely to be catching. Once I found out exactly where people entered to go and catch the Eurostar trains and the times of the next few departures, I decided that the best course of action would be to head over to near where people passed by to catch the train. I grabbed a coffee and went and waited. The next train to leave was due to leave in about an hour. I watched as people arrived and passed me by to go and catch the trains. I slowed my perception of time down enough to make it easier to check out each person who walked, and in some cases ran, past me. Rawlins wasn't among the passengers catching this train, so I continued to wait for the next departure time. After waiting about 30 minutes more, I saw Rawlins heading towards me. He looked pale and appeared to be sweating. He definitely didn't seem keen on catching this train. I watched as he walked past me ever closer to the train. He stopped and put his bag down. He only seemed to have a small bag with him and couldn't have been carrying more than a bit of hand luggage. I didn't know if he had any other luggage, on the way, and where the nuclear device he was going to be planning on selling was. He also had a laptop bag, which I presumed contained his computer. I thought to myself that he probably had all of the information he was planning on selling on the laptop, but I wanted to know about the nuclear device. It had to be somewhere, and it had to be sent to France somehow, either with him or separately. I approached Rawlins, touched him on his shoulder, and said, "Sleep deeply and soundly, with your eyes open. You'll continue to respond to me, and you'll follow me as we walk away from here. As we walk away from here, you'll feel better and better." I then turned and walked away from the Eurostar trains. Rawlins followed. I didn't have to keep looking back to check he was following me. I just knew that he would be. He walked out of the train station. The street outside the exit was crowded with fast-paced pedestrians dashing to and fro. I wanted to be somewhere quieter, so I crossed the road and headed down Crestfield Street. We walked down Crestfield Street until we came to a park on our right. We turned into the park and I sat on a bench by the baseball court. I told Rawlins to sit next to me. I asked him about the nuclear device. I needed to know where it was and how the deal was planned to go ahead. I also wanted to know where the information about the nuclear technology was that was to be handed over. Rawlins told me that the nuclear technology secrets were on the laptop he was carrying with him. I asked him to get this out and to show me. He dutifully did this. I asked him whether this information was stored elsewhere. Rawlins said that this was just a copy of the information being worked on back at Silo, and all the information is confidentially stored back in the labs. I made Rawlins give me his laptop. I unscrewed the casing and took out the hard drive. I put the hard drive on the ground and set fire to it. As it was burning, I asked Rawlins again about the nuclear device. Rawlins said that it was being taken to Paris as a separate package. He was due to collect it in a few days to take to his meeting. The package was in the form of a small van with the device in the back. He said that the van was due to be parked in a car park in Paris, having been driven from the UK via Calais. Once Rawlins had given me all the information, letting me know what the van looked like and where it was parked, I told him to close his eyes, go to a pleasant place in his mind, to sleep deeply and soundly. I told him that whilst he slept deeply and soundly, he would have a heart attack and die, passing away peacefully in his sleep on this bench. Rawlins closed his eyes, appeared to relax deeply, and then in his sleep passed away from a hypnotically induced heart attack. I knew I had to get to Paris to dispose of the nuclear device, and had to ensure Toby became the CEO of Silo. I took Rawlins' passport and train ticket and dashed back to the St Pancras station, knowing I had a train to catch. When I arrived back at St Pancras train station, I quickly rushed for the Eurostar. I had to convince the person checking the ticket that I was Rawlins. I showed the passport, looked her straight between the eye, and hypnotically told her, "This is me." She accepted that and was so easily hypnotized, she even responded, "That is you." I put the passport away, having had my ticket and passport checked, and boarded the train. The door closed, sounding like an airlock, before the train set off from the station. It was a comfortable journey. The train started off seemingly slowly, but within about 15 minutes, it was apparent that we were travelling at some pace. I relaxed back in the seat and enjoyed the peace, listening to the sound of the train passing over the rails, and the sound made by the air pressure when we passed other trains. It didn't seem like long before the view outside the window became dark, and after only a short while we seemed to spring out the other side. Looking out the window, aware that What I was seeing was a different country to that I had not seen many minutes earlier, felt unusual. The view didn't seem much different. It looked much like the landscape had looked before we entered the tunnel. As the train approached Paris, it was apparent that this area was more built up. I hoped that I could find the van easily enough. I assumed it would have UK license plates and stand out in some way. On arrival in Paris, I left the train, walked through the station, found Bureau de Change before heading out to find a taxi. I didn't have to walk far before I found one. Getting in, I asked in French to be taken to the road of the car park where I could find the van. It took about 20 minutes before the taxi arrived near the car park. I disembarked and paid before continuing the final stretch of the journey on foot. After about 5 minutes in the car park, I found the van I was looking for. I had the key from Rawlins, and my plan was to take the van out of Paris, drive it to Dieppe, where I'd ditch it in the sea. This would make the nuclear weapon safe indefinitely. This wouldn't make the nuclear weapon safe indefinitely, but it would put the weapon out of the hands of the wrong people long enough for me to report the van's location and contents back to the leaders of the Hypnotic Assassins. They would then clear it up and properly dispose of the problem. The drive to Dieppe in a slow white van seemed to take forever. While I was driving there, I telephoned Silo Security outside Rawlins' office and told them that Rawlins had tragically died of a heart attack, and so they needed to call a meeting with the board of directors to discuss his replacement. I told them where they could find the document that said he wanted Toby to be the next CEO of Silo. The security listened and said they'd arranged the meeting to take place at 4 p.m. today. It was important that if Rawlins had already planned on a replacement in the event of his death, this replacement started as soon as possible, provided the board of directors agreed. Because of the nature of the company, it needed to have a face and needed to always appear on top of its business affairs. If there was any sign that there were struggles or any sign of uncertainty surrounding the business, there was a risk people could lose confidence in them and could lose millions of pounds of business. I hung up the phone, continued my journey, planning to call them back about 5 p.m. to see that Tony had become CEO. When I arrived at Dieppe, I found a place to park for a while so that I could plan the quietest place to ditch the van. I decided that I wouldn't travel back to Paris to make my journey home. I had a return ticket from Paris to St. Pancras, but the return ticket was for 9 days' time. I decided that the most sensible thing to do would be to use my own false passports and head back from Dieppe today. With that, as soon as I dumped the van, I knew that by using Rawlins' ticket to Paris, if anyone became suspicious, they could find out that a ticket of his was used after he died by someone claiming to be him. They could investigate. I'd prefer that they follow the lead to Paris and then have the lead dry up. I drove the van to a high cliff just outside Dieppe, planned to drive it off the cliff into the sea. I was confident that the nuclear weapon wouldn't detonate from the drop. The main risk was that if the container for the weapon was damaged, radiation could escape and cause pollution. But this wasn't very likely to happen, so long as I could drive the van fast enough to clear all of the rocks and hit the water. The water would be a heavy impact, but would certainly break the fall enough to prevent damage within the van. Once I was ready, I made sure I had my seatbelt on. The van had to be driven off the cliff to ensure it remained steady and on course, and to keep it accelerating until the last moment. The cliff top was uneven, so just trying to wedge the accelerator on and tie the steering wheel in place wouldn't work. The van would bounce around as it approached the edge and could drop down at any angle, scraping and crashing its way down to the edge of the cliff and then smashing at the bottom. If it did this and caught fire, the emergency services would probably arrive and try to deal with the situation, which would put them at risk of radiation exposure if the weapon casing was ruptured or damaged. I put my foot to the floor, held the steering wheel tightly. It took all my strength as the van accelerated to hold the wheel straight and to make the minor adjustments needed to keep it from changing course. I'd started the van well away from the cliff. It took almost 50 seconds to accelerate from 0 to 60. So I needed plenty of distance. After almost a minute, the van made the final push off the top of the cliff. As it left solid ground, It was instantly noticeable how heavy it was. It seemed to fall at a steeper angle than I'd been expecting. Luckily, it was keeping fairly straight, keeping the nose in the air. I wanted the van to hit the water as much as possible with the base of the van, not nose first. By hitting the water in this way, all of the shock would pass through the base and through me from the bottom up, reducing the risk of whiplash. If the van hit the water nose first, I'd be thrown forward and be more likely to sustain serious injuries. I wasn't using hypnosis to distort my perception of time, so it was surprising how much time it felt passed between leaving the top of the cliff and striking the water. Eventually, the van made contact with the water, with a loud crash and a burst of water into the van through the base of the front, and a cloud of spray rising up around the van. The impact winded me for a moment. The van very quickly began to sink, and I quickly realized I couldn't open either door because of the pressure of the water on the outside. My only option was to wait for the van to sink enough for the water pressure on the inside and the outside to equalize. I wasn't keen on this, but it was my best option. I was thinking that if too much pressure was placed on the windscreen, this could implode and I'd be struck with broken glass and a wave of high-pressured water. As the water flooded into the van, the nose began to sink faster. After a few moments, the water could be seen rising up the front of the windscreen. Once the water was about 2/3 of the way up the windscreen, it began to crack. I made sure that my seatbelt was unfastened so that once I was able to open the door, I'd be able to swim free quickly. I didn't want any complications by leaving things to the last minute. The windscreen held out long enough for the van to fill with water. Just before it was totally full, I took a deep breath of air and then relaxed as I sat back in my seat to try and make that oxygen last as long as possible. I kept myself calm and my metabolism slow. I tried to open the door, but it didn't open. I then tried the passenger door with the same result. I couldn't get into the back of the van to try to go through the back, and kicking the windscreen didn't break it. I tried to break the windscreen again a few times, and also the windows in the doors. It didn't matter how much I tried, I was unable to escape the van. I felt that if I had the leverage, one of the doors might be able to open, but I couldn't get enough power behind it. I decided there was only one option for me to give it my best possible chance. I focused on slowing my metabolism down. I made myself colder and colder until my pulse was barely detectable and my body was barely alive. It was almost as if I was in a state of suspended animation, like when you find people who've drowned in freezing cold lakes and many hours later they're pulled out of the lake, slowly warmed up, and are revived. They survive because their metabolism was so slow they didn't need any energy. I began to feel faint and was reaching the point where the automatic breathing reflex would kick in. I decided to drift into my cabin by the woods and the Great Lake. Once I was in the cabin, I felt like I was fine. I'd slowed my perception of time so that my experiences here would last indefinitely within the space of a fraction of a second of real world time, unless I had a sense that it was safe to return to reality. I wanted to ensure that if I died in reality, I'd still live on here in my own reality, unaware of my real death. I didn't know what was going to happen. All I could do now was wait. The end. There's a bit about some of the techniques used. I've talked about the agreement set yesterday. I talked about the other day where you get agreement. So you say things like, you're sitting there reading this. The person thinks, yeah, that's what I'm doing. And you can notice your voice in your mind. The person's reading, so they can. And as you now pay attention, you can be aware of the movement of your eyes while you read. Again, that's true. They will be. So you're getting agreement by saying truisms. And you can now find yourself drifting off in your mind, like drifting into a daydream. And they're more likely to agree to the final one because they've agreed to a bunch of other things. I talk in here about linking suggestions. So things like, you can listen to me and go into a trance. So you're linking listening with going into a trance. You can look at this writing and begin to relax. So again, you're linking looking at the writing with relaxation. Because you're listening to me, you'll go into a trance. So again, you're linking listening with going into a trance. As you listen to me, you can go into a trance. So there's another way of doing it. I talk about presuppositions. That's where you presuppose something like, what do you think being hypnotized will feel like? So you say will, which implies it's happening. Don't go into a trance until you've finished reading this implies you will go into a trance. It's just a question of when, and it's a case of when it's you've finished reading. Vague language. So, for example, at times you've got a tendency to feel under pressure. Often in these times, you find that you doubt yourself and you don't believe what you're capable of. There are sometimes some things in your life that I would rather not name that you don't like. They get you down at times, but you pick yourself up, sometimes unaware of how, and you try to keep going. You know your close friends think you're kind and helpful. You've a few quirks and tendencies, and whether you realize it or not, these are parts of what make you who you are. So you're saying something that actually applies to pretty much anyone. It's just vague wording, but it can sound quite specific. Like you can say to somebody, sometimes you notice that you lack confidence and you feel like that, but you don't necessarily think it's very often, assuming it's someone who doesn't. Over the next week, you'll be walking around and will notice a flash of red. Oh no, I'm not even going to read all these. So yeah, embedded commands and suggestions I've talked about before, and then there's other hypnotic techniques. So anyway, I can try and drink my the remainder of my cold coffee now. So book one ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. Not too much of a cliffhanger, because you've left the cliff. You're not hanging around anywhere. But I'm just scrolling back to see what any comments were. And I'll see how quickly I can get down the comments so that I can see what's coming up at the bottom. Right. At the top. Just scrolling down. Are you counting my yawns at the beginning? Just scrolling down. Yeah, we've all done the seeing sounds thing at times. Yeah, you don't want a groin shot. Or a face shot. Yeah, getting Hugh on side is helpful. Yeah, you had to wait for the gore. The pain-free Hugh thing, obviously, as I've said before, everything in it, in the story, is based on stuff that is genuine stuff that people have done. There was a hypnotist, I can't remember his name, he's an Irish hypnotist who, at least back in the 90s or whatever, used to live in a castle in Ireland and used to hypnotize all his staff. But one thing he did was he hypnotized, I can't remember the boxer's name. There's a documentary about it as well. He hypnotized a boxer who fought Chris Eubank and beat Chris Eubank. And what he said to this boxer was, "You won't feel any pain. You'll just become a killing machine, intent on killing Chris Eubank." So you won't go down. You'll just be intent on constantly going straight for him, kind of like a wild animal. It doesn't matter how much punishment you get, you just won't stop. You'll just keep going and going. And Chris Eubank tried to push for hypnosis not being allowed to be used in sports like that, because he felt that the reason he was beaten was because of this unfair advantage, that he was against an opponent who felt no pain and who didn't respond to any of the punches he was throwing at him. He just kept coming straight for him, regardless of how bad he was getting beaten up, and just kept attacking violently until he won. And there was nothing Chris Eubank could do about it. So yeah, but this hypnotist, I remember a reasonably well-known hypnotist who went to this hypnotist's castle, and he was telling a story on one of his training courses that I was attending, where while he was in this hypnotist's castle having dinner, some members of staff for his business walked in while they were mid-step, halfway across the floor of the castle, across the room. He clicked his fingers, and mid-step they just slumped forwards and flew across the floor onto their face. And he then walked over to them and said something like, "You'll double my income, you'll double the profits in the shop," or whatever it is. "You'll double the profits in the venue over the next month. You'll find a way of making that happen," etc., etc., etc. Clicked his fingers and sent them on their way, and explained how he chooses staff by how hypnotizable they are to how he wants them to respond. And at least I've got a newspaper article from probably 2005 or 6, where he was on the front cover of the newspaper as being the world's highest paid hypnotist. So he's reasonably unknown as a hypnotist among ordinary people. So he's not like known like Paul McKenna is, and yet the kind of money he makes when he works with people is significantly more than someone like Paul McKenna makes working with people. Let's scroll down. Having a look down. Dangly eyeballs. Yeah, we all like dangly eyeballs. There's a horror film I saw as a kid where, as part of the film, the person has one of their eyes pop out and it's hanging on its eyeball string, and the bad guy kind of points the eyeball face upwards and then stamps on it while it's sort of dangling out the person's socket. And the person's alive, obviously, during this. I can't remember what the horror film was now, but yeah, gutting yourself. Yeah, I'm not violent. It's just the story. He's an assassin. Assassins generally have a little violence in when they're doing their job. Yeah, missed an opportunity to say deeper and deeper while he's stabbing himself. Yep, there'd be some evidence on the golf club. You could hypnotize someone to clean it up. Although the thing is, with everything being so messy and a lot of evidence being around that kind of points in a clear direction, the assumption would be that they probably not do a very thorough. They probably just think it's like some contamination from somewhere or something. No buffering, that's always a good thing. There shouldn't be a yawn by this point. I don't think there was there? Yeah, the Boris bikes, they're bikes that when Boris Johnson was Mayor of London had introduced for people to cycle. Yeah, many places have a hedge, and then in front of them a low brick wall with iron bars above the brick wall, sort of around the wall. It's quite common. Always graceful. Just having a look down. Yeah, you can't waste toilet paper like that in 2020. Yeah, so I end up getting shot a few times in here, or the eye is in the assassin. Better than going bang, bang. Yeah, you keep. I can't really go beep every time I get to a swear word in the book, though. Yeah, luckily the girl wasn't left with the bodies. But the plan was that she crops up in book 3. For all I know, you could be writing stuff down below on this live chat bit faster than I'm scrolling down reading. Yeah, he has the advantage of not being shot 4 times. Yeah, it was a busy day, not a bad day. Bad day for some. Yeah, Toby has a bit of good fortune coming his way. Yeah, there probably was only that many people at some point. There's not huge numbers. Still reading down. I feel like I'm getting nearer to the bottom now. Yeah, Milton Erickson used to say that when asked about death, because he was very ill for most of his life, right from being like a teenager, um, he was often asked about death, and he would say, "Well, everyone dies. It's just some people do it more efficiently than others." Yeah, if he'd made it to France, he would have died anyway. Um, but ideally, I'd wanted to get the information out of him around things like where the actual bomb is, etc. Just reading through. Cat's being hypnotized. Cat sleeping to me. That's always good. And I've reached the end. Nearly. I've reached where you're talking about the end. Yeah, so I've got my cold coffee. Um, I don't mind cold coffee. It's not anywhere near as bad as. Oh, you're talking about the horror. That must be a comment relating to the stamping on the eye. Um, right, I've made it to the bottom. So, yeah, book 2, the plan is that you get saved. Obviously, I don't know if I'm ever going to write book 2 and 3, but there was a 3-book plan. Book 2, obviously, you end up saved by. I say obviously, you don't know this. I know this. By the girl that's in the cafe at the beginning of book 1 of this book, the one who you read the mind of. So most of book 2 you spend in a hospital, not in a particularly good way. You've obviously been shot a handful of times. You've not yet seen a doctor to get it medically checked out. You say no spoilers. If I don't give you spoilers for book 2 and 3, you may never ever know. And the number of people that pester me and say years later, you need to do book 2 and book 3. And I probably won't until way off in the future end up getting to do them, because to me they're completed. So I don't have the motivation for my hands to do it. So yeah, so obviously book 2, the start of it is that the girl that you saw at the beginning happens to be on that beach and swims out, manages to save you, and has the advantage of not being inside the van, and so can use things like a rock easier, because obviously the window cracks, but from trying to kick without any proper sort of room to maneuver from it out inside is really hard. Um, and so yeah, she saves you. Most of book 2 is spent with you in hospital, but your story for book 2, so the assassin story for book 2, takes place in the assassin's mind, where they realize that actually this, obviously I told you through this book a couple of times about the trick where you can slow time right down to the point where a fraction of a second of real world time passes, and yet in your mind an infinite period of time can pass. And what you discover during part of book 2 is that every assassin through history, since that first assassin who developed all this and came up with realizing that you can do this, every assassin has actually done this at the point of death, where they've been quick enough to. So obviously if you're killed and you didn't know, like if someone stabbed you in the back and you didn't have time to even think, or chopped your head off or something, you might not do it. But assuming you kind of know in a split second that you're about to die, you've got time to do this. And it turns out that this cabin isn't just a cabin that they've got in this place they've created in their mind. It's like almost like a universal consciousness kind of place, where the consciousness of all the assassins who've done this are all there, and you end up having certain things that play out there, where you learn certain knowledge, deeper knowledge, from the fact there's all these thousands of assassins. and you learn lots about this kind of place and this state of mind, etc. So you go on a bit of a journey through all of that while your body's being repaired and fixed up. Um, and well, everyone gets whatever venue they like. So you've chosen, as the assassin, you've chosen this specific cabin location that you like. That's what you find relaxing. But someone could be, for example, in a tower block in a city somewhere, because that might be the environment that they feel comfortable and like. Um, but another reason I started writing book two, and I started it with a terrorist attack, and that terrorist attack, I decided, I started with, I started with the result of a terrorist attack, but that terrorist attack, I realized, was such a simple attack that would be so easy for literally anyone to go and do, and so effective in terms of causing panic and stuff like that, that I didn't want it to be written. And so, but then I don't want to write a sort of half-assed attack. So I'm kind of stuck between writing the one that I have written, but worrying that someone could copy it in real life because it's quite simple to copy and would be incredibly effective at creating panic around a country, um, or changing the attack and then coming up with something that maybe just doesn't have quite the same impact. So that kind of put me off also carrying on writing, because I didn't want to write something that someone might go out and actually use in the real world. Because, but at the same time, you're trying to write a story that intentionally has things that are kind of believable and scary to think about. To think, oh no, I'd hate it if that happened. So it kind of became a bit of a difficult situation. I'd have to think of something totally different for a idea, because that terrorism group would be the one that you then have to try and deal with throughout the second book. But the overarching story, while you have to come out of your state and what have you and go and deal with that, but the overarching story ends up being that by the end of the second book, big spoiler alert, by the end of the second book, you don't want to be an assassin anymore. You decide you want a quiet life, you want to give everything up, and you end up wanting to settle down with this girl that you've met, the one that was in the first book that helps you at the beginning of the second book, the one who then doesn't know you but feels a connection with you somehow, not knowing the reason she partly feels a connection with you is because of the fact that obviously you did build a connection with her in that cafe at the beginning of the first book, and then she sees you in trouble just randomly. Although you kind of learn that there's no such thing as things necessarily being entirely random, in the way that you think about them. And she sits by your bedside the whole time that you're in the hospital, having just rescued you, and has no reason or motivation for doing that when she obviously doesn't know you. You're just a stranger who she's rescued. And so you end up falling in love through that second story, but you've still got a mission to do, and you've got people to save and people to kill and all the rest of it. But you fall in love and you decide that's far more important than following in the path you've been born into, and what have you. Then the third book picks up years and years later, kind of 20 years later. And it turns out, even when you've made someone not remember seeing their mum killed, it festers away in the back of their mind, and that comes out to get them. That comes out to, they go to therapy and all the rest of it, and eventually it comes out in therapy, and they end up with this sudden recall of what happened, and then they end up wanting to hunt you down. And so you end up with this 25-year-old girl trying to kill you when 20 years earlier you gave up, or nearly 20 years earlier, you gave up being an assassin, and now someone's hunted you down, and you've got this whole new life and you have to deal with this, but at the same time, you know that you're responsible for what is coming for you. And do you look upon this person as being a bad person when they come for you because they are trying to kill you and they might kill your loved ones, etc.? Or do you look upon them with compassion and kindness and try and deal with the situation without causing them harm, etc.? That kind of brings back to the heart of what the Hypnotic Assassins were before the 1938 incident that wiped them all out. Yeah, yeah, they just do the occasional hypno prank. So let me just have a look, see if anyone else has written anything. Can one just walk out of the Hypnotic Assassin game? Technically, yes. They're not, they're not forcing. You're kind of born into it, and you follow it, and you fall into, like most things in life, you fall into it thinking this is what you're supposed to do. This is what you've been brought up to do. So this is what you do. So obviously there are some repercussions, but it's not like people hunt you down or anything. The difficulty comes when stuff that you did, consequences of your actions, come back to get you later in life. Yeah. So, but the thing is, because I already know how book 2 and book 3 goes, and I know the whole of that story. As I say, the only bit that I started writing that I would have to change if I decided to write it, which I can't see at the moment doing, would be what the terrorists are going to do that leads you to having to take on those terrorists. Because the terrorists can't do what I've got planned for them to do, because it's something so simple that anyone, literally a group of people, could just choose to go and do it, and it would cause major panic and chaos throughout whatever country they did it in, for a very, very long time, and would and it's not even like the current situation creates a lot of chaos and panic throughout the country and costs the country a lot of money. So it would have a similar-ish impact to what is currently happening, um, except that you can go out of your home. So it wouldn't have quite the same impact, but it'd be like a similar-ish kind of impact. But yeah, I've got far more important books to write before that, like the rest of my Hypnotherapy Revealed series. I've got 2 out of 10 written, so I need to get the other 8 finished, and I've written probably maybe 5 to 10,000 words of each of those books, and so I've got a lot of work to do in those ones. And the one with Dr. David Lewis as well, I'd like to get that one written. There's no such thing as problems, only solutions. And I'd like to get another book I've started writing and haven't finished writing yet written, which is my well-being for YouTubers and digital entrepreneurs book, that's about sort of handling some of the stuff you get, like people complaining and what have you. When do I sleep? Nighttime at some point. Yeah, what is sleep? So yeah, so it's I've got lots of books that I haven't yet finished writing. I've got the third book of children's stories that I'd kind of like to get written, except that I know that no one would buy it, and so that means that that takes away the uh, so I know that takes away the motivation to write it, because I know that almost no one will buy it. I'm more of a night owl person, so to me, I go through this stage of getting tired at about maybe 7 till 10 p.m., and then I start being more awake again from about 10 till about 2. Um, and I've always kind of had that I have this kind of, if I don't go to bed by kind of 10:30 or something, I end up wide awake again, and then struggle to fall asleep again for hours. But I go through a stage kind of late afternoon, well, late afternoon, early evening. Yeah, I'm normally okay at 2 p.m. Um, and then I'll get up at like 7 or something. And obviously, currently, I don't have to set any alarms, so I just wake up when I end up waking up. So this morning it was about, I think, 7:30 that I woke up. I do find that some of you there, it doesn't matter what time I post something, someone will like it or comment on it or something, as if you don't get enough sleep yourselves. Well, it did take me until 1 hour 39 minutes, and factored in that I'd factored in that if that it would take me about 1 hour 10 minutes for every um, video. So I'd worked out kind of it was taking me about 10 minutes to read every 4 pages um, of the book. So, but I knew that the last bit, just where the chapters fell, was likely to be I could either have extended the last one by one more chapter, and then this one by one less chapter. That would have evened it out a bit. Um, but that would have made the last one a little bit longer because that chapter happened to be just a slightly longer chapter because obviously you were dealing with a couple of people to assassinate at once. And there are things in the book that people don't really pay attention to who've bought it, like the fact that throughout the book, the first letter of each chapter is obviously a large letter. No, not you will buy book for 3. Or 2. I'm sure someone's hopefully keeping track. I'm doing the slow reveal. Yes, who was the designated note taker? Who's paying attention? There, so that should have been nice and easy for you, for those who paid attention. But yeah, so the idea was that I wanted to make sure there was some sort of Easter egg in the book, with the expectation that if it ever kind of became a popular book and I wrote more and I end up with more in the world, I wanted each book to have Easter eggs in that people could then find out, that people would think, did you realize that the first letter of each chapter spelt out a sentence and things like that. So yeah, you've pretty much written the entire thing out in the live chat. But yeah, so yes, I just wanted something that that obsessive fans would stumble across and find clues to, and think, that was a reference to this, and with that being the biggest one in there. Some more of my cold coffee. You've essentially spelt it out in the live chat between you. You don't need my help. But because you couldn't obviously see what I was reading, you couldn't see the pages. I had to show you at the end, because you wouldn't know about it otherwise. And anyone outside the stream will probably never know. So you got some of it. You got the end. You did write down the beginning. Between you. I saw in the live chat that you'd written down the letters as I was saying them, or showing them. And some of you wrote down the whole words. Nope, the first one was a Y. The second one was O. Yep. Holly got it. See, that was easy. That wasn't like pulling teeth. But yeah, so you'll know something that people outside this stream probably won't notice. There's not enough fans out there to read it or have read it. And I write quite bluntly when it comes to describing things like the death of people. Some people obviously have commented saying, we want more description of the environment and stuff like that. And I'm not really so much of a description of the environment person. I'm more a get on with the assassin stuff. Yeah, tired observation isn't necessarily easy. And obviously, thank you all for those of you who joined me for all 4 of these parts of reading all this. Yeah, 'cause the other thing was that obviously initially I was going to call it what was I going to call it? Journal of a Hypnotic Assassin. I felt that was too long though. I just called it the Hypnotic Assassin. But obviously it's written as the Hypnotic Assassin writing his journal. Hence, he lives because it starts off pointing out it's his journal, um, with him saying that he's writing all this down. And so that's why it was written the way it was, but also why it's not written in a way that has like fluffy stuff in and lots of stuff like people have said they'd love much more conversation, backwards two-way conversation among characters. But when you write a journal, how much of it do you spend writing every last bit of conversation? You might write just the key bits of, oh yeah, I met with Derek today and we talked about this. He said that, 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 and that. But you wouldn't like go into full-on conversations about everything. Um, yeah, it is my. I'm sorry, but your opinion doesn't matter to me. Or no, your opinion means very little to me. It's that one. Um, this reading. Yeah, Michelle, you had to catch up, didn't you? Because you commented yesterday that you hadn't heard the one before it, and so you need to listen to that to listen to yesterday's. So I did think, oh, I wonder if you'll listen to all of them and catch up. I don't know. Diaries that I've got some of my diaries. They definitely don't go into full on probably because I couldn't care less about most conversations, um, unless I was writing that this is how I did this. So if I'm writing about something I've done during the day, then I'll say they were saying this and I said this and responded in that way so that I could do this technique. But I wouldn't record that people talked about what the weather was like or what they, about gossip and all that sort of rubbish. Who cares about gossip? Um, yeah, so you have read this shirt before. I didn't even know there were Kung Fu Panda ebooks. I like the films. But yeah, so that was the idea, was that I wanted it to be written uh, from the assassin's perspective, um, how they would write a journal if they're trying to explain kind of their life and what they do, rather than um, it being kind of actually recording just day to day stuff, just talking specifically around their kind of profession. And mine pretty much, I don't write. Well, I haven't kept one actually since being self-employed. Really, I did for the first year of being fully self-employed, um, but then my life consisted largely of sitting in a room on my own, talking to cameras. There's nothing to write then. Um, yeah, I find gossip tedious, and talking about things like reality TV and stuff, I find that very tedious as well. Unless someone's talking about it from a perspective of, say, social psychology or something like that, then I might engage in um, a conversation about it if I've seen it, but not like it would have to be a live reality TV thing for that to happen. And soaps, I really don't get why someone would watch soaps or talk about them. Yep, still talk to cameras. Yeah, that's what I mean. It has to be a live reality TV thing, like for example, Big Brother, as it was, not like these ones where it's all scripted and it's actually, you know, they use the term reality quite loosely. Um, and obviously, I've said before about having the work colleague who said to me, "Oh, you never engage in conversation with me about things when I come over here to your office." And I pointed out to her that's because she's boring, because all she talks about is soaps and reality TV, which I've got no interest in. And we carried on not talking. Yeah, I don't really get weird that Michael Jackson isn't singing about a librarian girl. Um, I still think that's incredibly strange. I naturally, for my since the 1990s, I naturally thought that, um, and it still feels like it's the right thing, that Michael Jackson was singing about a librarian girl, talking about how she transformed his world by introducing him to books and things, and introducing him to all the knowledge in all the books. I naturally thought, and still do, that that's what it's about. Nowadays, I find myself probably watching YouTube more than I watch anything else. There's normally things on there that I end up finding, like short documentaries and things, um, with just the occasional TV series from time to time that crops up, and then I get into it, like Picard or something, or the what is it, the space one that's just done the third or fourth or whatever season on Amazon. Can't think what it's called now. It's very famous, very popular. And occasionally I'll watch movies, but there's not many movies out that I end up liking. I quite like a good martial arts movie, but then things that I would class as a good martial arts movie are things that people don't really make nowadays. It's more kind of, I prefer, sort of Jackie Chan style stuff. Um, and yeah, they just don't do that. Something you can watch on YouTube is, you can watch the Peregrines over here in Chichester. I don't know what the name of the channel is, but like the Chichester Peregrine Falcons. Yeah, I don't mind Disney cartoons. I'm not really a fan of live action films. Generally, I'm not a fan of a lot of live action stuff. I feel that as soon as something's turned into cartoon form, suddenly it's significantly better. Uh, I think before it's turned into cartoon form, I find it really difficult to follow. Um, there would be a huge temptation if you had said there's actually a channel with streaming a Shark Tank, that I would choose the Shark Tank. And if this stream was carrying on running, I'd be you'd be watching me watching a stream of a Shark Tank. I think a zoo stream would probably annoy me. I'd be wanting to think, how can I go and free? In fact, the Shark Tank, I have this kind of thought um, that I'd want to free the animals. Nearly finished my cold coffee. Yeah, I'd happily watch bears in Alaska. I think that would be quite an interesting thing. Bruce Lee, I like as well, but I definitely am more a fan of things like Jackie Chan's style of doing things. And there's a few kind of martial arts films and things that crop up in a similar vein. So not as funny as Jackie Chan things, but where like the Bruce Lee films, it would normally be one or two people fighting him at once, and everyone else dances around the outside, looking like they're kind of involved in the fight, but they never actually move into the fight. Whereas Jackie Chan films, everyone bundles in at once, largely, and so he has to then deal with things coming from all different angles, and makes it far more kind of um, I don't know, far more entertaining, far more kind of real to watch, rather than this whole, even though it's not real to watch, if that makes sense. um, and there are films like, I like the John Wick's films with what's his face. His name will come to me, but I like the John Wick's films. And Yes, there are some films where the fighting is done like that, where there's lots of attackers at once. But yeah, Jackie Chan can't get insured, as you mentioned, because of the risk that he puts himself at and the high risk of paying out. Probably is a lot of Dan time. Years ago, I used to watch lots of live streams of like the ocean and stuff. Um, so just live streams of areas where um, it's kind of, I think it's going to be relaxing. Yeah, I've seen him talk about watching his own stuff. Um, and I was hoping they were going to do like another Rush Hour film and another uh, Shanghai film. I thought that would be cool. Yeah. Whereas if I don't want people to bother me, I tell them to go away. Um, and then if they don't, I ignore them. Not that there's many people that are around to bother me. Don't know. If I had a 14-year-old, I'd have to tell them to go away if they were bothering me. I'm trying to think what to possibly do for my uh, for when I hit 60,000 subscribers. Whether to do anything. It's taken me a very long time though to get there, especially given that I'm doing all these live streams, and all the live streams, I can guarantee that when I end this live stream and go back to click on the thing to take me back to my normal screen, it will show that I've lost subscribers while I'm sat here talking. Um, so it's taking me quite a while I'm doing all these live streams to build people. I think I'm getting fewer subscribers every day than I've got in years, in the last couple of years. Um, I've had some days where I've had like minus 50 subscribers in a day, where it's actually showing, there's the line, and then normally there's kind of different peaks above the line showing my subscribers, how many I'm getting a day. Now there are troughs below the line, where I'm losing subscribers over some days. Yeah, I probably lose subscribers every yawn, not showing enough interest in the people who are tuning in. So it's going to take me probably a while, I suspect. Whereas going back to say December, where I wanted to get to 50,000, as many of you know, I wanted to get to 50,000 subscribers, and I was really looking forward to, hoping I could do it this side of Christmas, as I was saying at the time. So not now, this side of Christmas, but at the time, I was saying I wanted to do it this side of Christmas. And I was growing at about 250 to 300 subscribers a day. And so I ended up hitting it like the middle of December, hitting 50,000. But then sort of from February, that's all sort of slowed down to like 100 subscribers a day. And then once I come sort of March, it died down to, obviously now it's much lower. So it's going to probably take me a little while to get to 60,000, even though I'm only like 200 or 300 subscribe. No, I can't remember. 1,200, 1,300, or I don't know, something like that away. But also, I'm 10 stories away from 200 sleep meditations being on my channel. That's 200 unique sleep meditations. So that's not including the sleep meditations where I've done the audio with the sound effects versions. So given that I add a new meditation every week, that means that obviously I'll be adding one on Wednesday. So including Wednesday, there's 10 weeks worth in 10 weeks time. So say 2 months time, I will have hit 200 sleep meditations on my channel. Thank you. Although obviously the sleep stories are just me doing hypnosis. It's just me narrowing focus of attention, increasing responsivity, just in the direction of sleep and around the ideas of reducing anxiety, managing stress, and reducing worry. But yeah, so in theory, in 2 months, I will have hit 200 sleep meditations on my channel. So I'm trying to think, do I do something? It could end up being that I hit 60,000 and 200 at the same kind of time. So I'm just trying to think whether I do something for both, something for one or something for the other. Whether I do something special in relation to the sleep meditations. Obviously, I've also got like 10 or 12 or whatever sleep meditations that are sound effects ones, or 10, I think. I don't know, something like that. But not counting those, I will have 200 unique ones. And I don't know any other channel that has 200 unique sleep meditations off the top of my head. And that also, that are done with with the person who's done them, their own stories as well, rather than just reading stories. Yeah, I don't want to stress myself out, obviously. There isn't a back pain sound effect one. The What back pain sound effects? Don't know what that is. Yeah, I don't think there's any channels that I specifically subscribe to with notifications. Probably because I'm on YouTube pretty much every day. Well, I am on YouTube every day. There's never a day that I don't look on YouTube. One of the first things I do first when I wake up in the morning is look on YouTube. Um, Nothing that causes more work. Um, it will end up causing more work. The question is, if it's planned work, then it doesn't cause me too much more work. And obviously, it causes me more work to come and be here live every day around all the work I do. Um, so I don't mind having more work caused as long as it's planned and I know what I'm doing and I'm setting out to do it. Um, yeah, I've shared all of my sleep, no, my pain management ones a number of times over the last, well, over a number of streams. Obviously, Michelle, it was you who I first, I think, shared them for a while ago. Yeah, that's like when people say things like Alexa and then say something after it, and suddenly they've got their Alexa or whatever it happens to be responding in a room. Yeah, one of the MP3s in that folder that I shared the link of is a back pain MP3, but it's a very direct one. It was intentionally. The thing is, they've never been done specifically for other people, as so they have been sometimes, but not. I don't know how to describe. They're not done like for generic other people. Um, so I end up thinking, oh, let's do a different type of induction for this or a different way of approaching that. So I try different things in different tracks. So you can use other ones, but I think there was someone who very specifically wanted to learn a specific hypnotic approach and wanted help with back pain. And so I made a track that used that specific hypnotic approach and covered back pain so that they could practice and learn that. Yeah, I intentionally made sure I didn't say anything afterwards that an Alexa would kind of do. I made sure to say normal kind of words afterwards, just in case I woke anyone's Alexas up. So yeah, so the MP3s obviously all cover different types of approaches for different types of things. Um, you can ask a specific hypnosis question. Yeah, sometimes they don't respond. The annoying one is my PlayStation always responds to things that aren't even PlayStation. You don't even have to say PlayStation. Somehow it seems to interpret random words that don't sound anything like the word PlayStation as being PlayStation, and then it turns itself on, silence it. So I'll be watching a YouTube video on my TV on my PlayStation, and it will silence my TV because it's heard the word PlayStation, even though the word PlayStation isn't there, and what it heard was off the TV. meaning I now can't hear the TV that I'm trying to watch because it's thinking that I'm trying to get its attention. And so it shuts my TV up, which is the one thing I don't want it to shut up. And so I have to then wait for it to um, know that no one's talking to it. So you wait like 5 seconds or something, or 10 seconds. And then it thinks, no, you don't want anything. Okay, you can have your sound back now. Yeah, it's obviously the anxiety that's the issue in relation to sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is perfectly normal, happens to literally every single person. There isn't anyone who sleep paralysis doesn't happen to. It's supposed to, well, there is actually. If you got brain damage or something, sleep paralysis doesn't happen to you. Uh, that's if you got damage that's specifically in the parts of the brain that deal with sleep paralysis. Um, Likewise, people who sleepwalk have a bit of a sleep paralysis issue because they're sleepwalking. Um, but in normal, healthy people, sleep paralysis should happen um, in everyone when you're dreaming to make sure that you don't move and act out your dreams. Um, and what can happen though, especially with people with anxiety, is as I've spoken before, if you have high anxiety, you overdream. And if you overdream, your brain wakes you up to try and stop you overdreaming. But that means your brain can wake you up while you're still in a dream state, while you're still in the rapid eye movement state. And because you're still in the rapid eye movement state, you are still sleep paralyzed. And because you're still paralyzed, you're now conscious and awake, and yet your body is still paralyzed because that's what is supposed to be happening in that moment in time. And obviously, that can then be scary for people. And So, obviously, if you can stop being anxious and you can stop worrying so that you don't overdream, um, and you don't do things that keep you in a light state of sleep so that you go into your deep states of sleep as well. So you don't do things like drinking and stuff, because obviously if you drink alcohol, drinking alcohol can often get you to sleep quicker, but you then only get the light part of your sleep. You don't really get the deeper stages of sleep. And because you don't get the deeper stage of sleep, obviously you're more likely then to wake up from that light stage of sleep. And when you wake up from the light stage of sleep, you end up potentially you can be paralyzed still because you've woken up and become conscious, but your body hasn't yet caught up with you. Um, but then likewise, you can end up dreaming and kind of being unparalyzed for a similar reason, that you end up with it sort of going faulty because of, again, normally people who end up sleepwalking do it at a time when you're kind of dreaming and not you don't do it during deep sleep. You do it when you're dreaming, and obviously you're not paralyzed for some reason. Your body hasn't responded, maybe through exhaustion or whatever. That part of the body, your part of your brain, doesn't react and paralyze you. Just scroll back. Um, so yeah, there's not a lot. The thing is, it's not something you are consciously controlling. If you wake up and you've got sleep paralysis, you don't have conscious control over, or it's incredibly unlikely you're going to have conscious control over the fact your body hasn't yet come out of the dream state. It just happens that it's a bit like lucid dreaming, but to an extent where you're actually now just fully conscious rather than being aware in your dream. You're just aware, and your body's still paralyzed. So if you're lucid dreaming, your body's paralyzed, but and you're aware, but you're aware within a dream context, whatever that happens to be. Whereas if you are kind of actually fully aware, then your body's going to be paralyzed and you're fully aware. Um, so I don't know of any specific way of convincing your body to unparalyze you other than relaxing there, knowing that it's just a natural thing. It happens to literally every single person. It's just that we don't normally notice that it's happening to us. In fact, that's how sleep apps work. If you buy a sleep app or have a sleep app on your mobile phone that's supposed to do things like help you with lucid dreaming or record how much of different parts of your sleep you get, what you do is you have your phone on your bed, and then it detects when your body is paralyzed. So it detects when you stop moving completely, and that then tells the phone your body's not moving now. That means you're dreaming. You're in dreaming sleep. And if it's a lucid dreaming app, that's when it will play a sound so that you become lucid within the dream. If it's a sleep monitoring app, then it will monitor that as you entering rapid eye movement sleep at those stages on the app, because it will know that's when you've become totally still. You've got sleep paralysis. So that's something that sleep apps detect using the sort of motion sensor that's in a mobile phone while it's resting on your bed. Um, and to my knowledge, I don't think I've ever sleepwalked. When I sleep on my back, I do a lot of very, very noisy, bad snoring, and can wake up with a really sore kind of up at the back, kind of behind my nose area where the skin there has obviously hung down and um, vibrated so much it kind of is sore. And it is far more common sleepwalking as a child than adults, unless the adult's very stressed or something. There are some questions here like, what is Alexa, that I bet someone has answered. But yeah, Alexa is just one of those kind of voice activated things that you can ask it to play radio stations on Spotify. You could ask it to what the weather is. It accesses the internet so that you can ask it questions and it'll answer, telling you different answers. A bit like, well, there are many from different companies of that kind of thing, like Google ones and other ones. Yeah, something that happens obviously if you stop drinking heavily is that your body responds the exact opposite. So, alcohol is one thing that, as a therapist, you're always told never to advise people to go cold turkey. And obviously, I've got personal experience of doing that, um, as I talked about the other day, where I went from like 3 bottles of Jack Daniels to nothing overnight and had shakes and pounding heart and sweating and all sorts of things. Um, so it's a bit like pain medication. If you stop taking pain medication, you're very likely to feel an incredible amount of pain, far worse than you would feel if you've never taken the pain medication in the first place, because it's like a pendulum. You know, the sort of the effects of say pain medication numbing all the pain. The opposite is when you come off that pain medication, if you've been on it for a long period of time so that your body's habituated to it, is that it swings the other way and you end up with excruciating pain because you came off the pain medication. And what often ends up happening that can lead to people having pain medication addictions is that when they get the excruciating pain, they think they need the pain medication because of that pain. It kind of convinces them this is why I take it, because that's how bad the pain is if I don't take it. When that's not true, it's a case of the reason the pain's that bad is because you've been on it for so long that now you're suddenly cutting it out completely rather than just very gradually weaning yourself off it. Um, you're getting the flip side of it. You're getting where it was killing pain. Now it's the effect of coming off it is giving you this excruciating pain. But once your body normalizes, that's when you'll know what your real pain is. And there are many cases where people turn out, because there are cases where doctors can't find a cause of the pain anymore, and people will turn out that they don't have any pain. The only reason they were taking the pain medication was because whenever they tried stopping it, they felt pain. And so they're taking pain medication because of the pain that's caused by the pain medication or by not taking the pain medication. Um, and so with drinking, uh, it's a relaxant. And so when you stop taking drinking alcohol, it's like your body has taken a stimulant, and you end up with this thing trying to force you into alertness, your body trying to force you into alertness. So it could well be that your body's forcing you into alertness um, while you're trying to sleep, and then you're being forced into that alertness at times where you genuinely are asleep, like in REM state. And so you're then having, which if it is that, obviously you're then going to recover once that part of the process has passed. Um, but that's kind of the difficulty, that with alcohol, it stops you going into deep sleep when you fall asleep. So it's a relaxant, so it can send you to sleep quickly generally, but it doesn't send you to deep sleep. It doesn't. It sort of affects how you sleep. Um, Even though I always found when I was drinking that I would fall asleep rapidly, literally just by closing my eyes, and then I would wake up a few hours later feeling incredibly refreshed and revitalized and full of loads of energy, as if I'd literally just slept for a week, and could then go for another 6 days without sleep, and then would close my eyes and I'd be asleep for like 8 hours, 4 or 8 hours or whatever, and I could just instantly feel wide awake. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Remembering the sleepwalk and thinking it's a dream. No reason why you wouldn't think it was a dream if you'd had it. Yeah, if you're aware in your dream, so you're aware that you're dreaming and you're aware in your dream, then you're lucid in it. And that's the whole point of lucid dreaming, is to be aware in your dream, kind of aware that you're dreaming. And ideally, the aim of people who do lucid dreaming intentionally is to reach a point where you can get that kind of, you're aware that you're dreaming and you're in control of yourself within the dream, so that you can kind of act out that dream, um, kind of do it being in control of yourself. My general experience has been that I don't. So when I've been lucid in a dream, I don't feel in control of me as such. So it's not like I can say I'm walking through the woods in a dream and there's two paths. It's not like I can say to myself, I'm going to take that path because I'm lucid in this dream. I'm kind of an observer. I'm lucid and aware, and I'm kind of an observer carrying it out as if it's the most natural thing in the world. I don't know if that makes sense, but in the same way that if I was in a real woods and there was two paths, I wouldn't think, ah, in the dream I'm going to take, or in this I'm going to take the left path, but no, because I'm aware of this, I'm going to take the right path. That sort of thought wouldn't cross my mind. So it's that kind of, from my personal experience, has always been that I'm aware that the actions are carrying out. I'm aware that I'm not stopping an action. It feels like that's the action that was meant to happen next. In the same way that in real life, it feels like that's the action that's meant to happen next. So I'm kind of, I don't know. It's a weird thing it feels to me like real life, but I know I'm dreaming. I can't kind of decide to make a different decision, knowing that in the dream I would have made another decision, because that decision feels like a natural decision that I've just made as that me in the dream. But yeah, I've talked in my sleep, but apart from that, I don't think I've done anything. Yeah, as far as I know, there isn't a hypnosis trick that could pull you out of it. Um, you'd have to obviously research and see, just research. Is there a way to get out of sleep paralysis or something like that? Obviously, everyone naturally does come out of it. It's not like, even to type the question means you've come out of sleep paralysis. Um, it's just a case of whether anyone has found a solution, that something they can do. But the reality is, it's just a case of the body having to catch up with the fact you've already opened your eyes and become conscious. It can sometimes happen to people, for example, if there's a noise in a room. So, say you're in the middle of dreaming and you've got neighbors upstairs or something, say you live in a flat, and I don't know, say their bedroom's above your bedroom and they get out of bed and drop something, or they're putting on their shoes or something in the morning, and they wake up, say, an hour before you would wake up. And as they're putting on their shoes, one of the shoes falls on the floor. It could be that that's during you in a REM state. And so you instantly jolt awake because there's been a loud noise that's woken you up, and you're kind of nearly awake anyway, because sleep is right near the border of wakefulness. So it's sorry, dreaming sleep is right near the border of wakefulness, so it's very easy to wake someone when they're dreaming. um, but if it's a sudden jolt up, obviously your consciousness is then awake faster than your body has responded to that shock. And so you can sometimes, pardon me, sometimes get a brief moment of, or up to a couple of minutes of your body still trying to actually catch up. Um, but you can hypnotize people who are sleepwalking. You can kind of start giving them suggestions and what have you, and guiding them back, you know, to their room or whatever. Yeah, it's very fortunate if you didn't end up having a negative side effect coming off of pain meds. Sober pirates. Yes, drinking tea. I think someone had suggested drinking tea as one of the suggestions, so I ended up obviously including that. But yeah, it's surprising how many problems end up remaining problems because starting to carry out the solution causes what you think you're carrying out the problem to solve, like the pain med thing. You know, an addiction to the pain medication you see as the problem, and you see it as actually, as I've said about the, no such thing as problems, only solutions. That problem is actually supposed to be the solution for the pain. And so you then start coming off the pain meds because you think, doctors telling me there's nothing wrong with my body, etc., I shouldn't have any pain. Once you come off them, you notice the pain, and so you start taking the pain meds again. Or the number of heavy drinkers that I've worked with, where they'll say, I've tried to quit drinking loads of times, but each time I try, I suddenly get hit with all the anxiety that's the reason I started drinking in the first place. And so I then have to drink to calm the anxiety. And then once I've drunk enough, I'm calm again, I'm okay, and everything's normal again. Um, Without realizing that that feeling of the anxiety isn't really anxiety. It's the side effect of the fact that they've literally not drunk for like 24 hours or something. Um, So once you educate the person about that, it now becomes easier to look at how best to sort of help them, because they now know if they get that, they can start to identify the difference between shaking and feeling like you're having a heart attack and feeling really anxious, kind of physiologically, um, based on the fact they know they've just stopped drinking, versus anxiety where you've got worry thoughts and stuff like that, and where you've got things that you are anxious about or something. Um, so it just kind of helps to then look at the best way forward. But there are a lot of problems like that. Like, for example, people have back pain and they lean forward to kind of, because it's more comfortable. But then because they're leaning forward, all their upper body is weighing at an awkward angle, meaning the back pain starts appearing again. But now it's a back pain because you're leaning forward. And so you lean forward more to lean out of the pain for it to be more comfortable. But then that's also an awkward angle. So you then get back pain to do with that. And then as soon as you go to try and straighten up, because you get told by doctors and everything, straighten up and what have you. As soon as you go to straighten up, that causes you the pain. That's the thing you're trying to escape from. But the thing, it's because you're trying to escape from it that causes you the pain. Um, so you kind of end up needing to push back into it, obviously making sure you've got medical supervision and that the doctors have told you, this isn't going to cause you harm, etc. But you end up needing to kind of push into it and follow the medical advice, even if it feels counterintuitive because of the fact that you're thinking, but my lived experience is different to, feels like what you're telling me is probably wrong. Maybe there are British pirates, although technically that's true, if you go back far enough, at least for the ones that go R. Well, as I say, the whole controlling the lucid dream thing, that's where I was saying it's difficult to figure out how to explain it, because I feel like I control my life, but I don't control my life by having my body saying it's going to go one direction, then I decide to go another direction. The same as in a dream, I don't have it that I'm necessarily making a decision that's counter to what was going to happen in the dream. It feels like I'm just acting out the dream. I'm just aware of acting out the dream. It's difficult to. I'm not. I don't feel like I'm trying to push against an alternative. I don't feel like I'm controlling it as such. Just like I don't feel like I'm controlling my life as such. I'm making my decisions, but I don't feel like I'm controlling. I don't feel like there was an alternative choice to make, and that I have actively pushed against one choice to take another. In the same way that I don't feel in a dream like I'm actively, my body was going to do one thing and now I'm going and doing something else. I feel like I'm just carrying out what I'm doing. So if I think, oh, that over there looks interesting, let's go to it, I go to it in a dream or something. But I don't feel like there was a different option open to me. I'm just aware that's what I'm doing in the dream. Um, yeah, the thing about looking up any research is making sure that it's ideally scientific based, as in not necessarily a .com website, unless that .com website has links to research that's not a .com website. Um, Making sure that it's not, so that at least as a starting point, so you can listen to different people's opinions and views on things, and things that someone could have a strategy that works for them or whatever. But a good starting point is around a subject is always to look at things like Google Scholar and see what Google Scholar says. What articles you can find on Google Scholar where hopefully it's scientific papers and things, and use that as kind of a starting point, and then move into other things. So as I say, there are things like I could just randomly have thought, oh yeah, I've had that happen to me, and I know what I do, and it works. But you want to kind of hear that from me after you've looked at other research so that you've got something to base it on. So if someone ends up saying, for example, you will get people in regards to sleep paralysis who would say things like, um, it's a demon sitting on your chest, pinning you down. It's evidence of the spiritual world, and all these sort of things. You don't want that to be your starting place, really. When you read those sort of things, you want it to then be in context with scientific knowledge that you've learned about what it is, what sleep paralysis is, and things like that first. It's a bit like any therapy treatment, that it's quite hard to get good therapy treatment, or it can be, um, because people will cling to a model of therapy, even if that model of therapy is like 100 years old, and even if it completely doesn't match up with neuroscience or anything like that. So what you want to do is start with the neuroscience, and look at kind of stuff around research around psychology, stuff that the research scientists say, work from there, and then look at the other stuff, and then see what fits with you. I just think it's generally a healthier way of looking at things. And then some things you'll think, actually, I'm going to look more into this now anyway, but at least you're basing it from a place of having got some education around the topic first. Um, it's a bit like flat Earth. The number of people that seem to believe the Earth is flat, who have said, well, I did my research and the Earth is flat. But obviously, their research was looking for whether the Earth is flat and looking at all the results that came up saying the Earth is flat and saying everyone else is lying, and then not being able to understand why that's not true, because they haven't looked at the actual evidence, that demonstrates that. But yeah, the challenge with hypnotizing while someone's sleepwalking is the same as the challenge, say, while someone's sleeping. You hypnotize people while they're sleeping, um, if they're in a REM state, especially. Uh, but you've got to somehow create a connection. You can't. People don't respond to something unless they're connected. So all this rubbish that you hear, where people say, um, use this subliminal audio tape and put it on when you're asleep and it will work. It will sound like music, but there's hidden messages playing on it. Many of them have no hidden messages on them. They've been scientifically checked to see if there's a hidden message. If there's a hidden message that scientific equipment can't pick up, neither can your brain. Your ears aren't hearing it, so clearly it's not going to respond to it. The ones where you can hear something playing, like a self hypnosis track or my sleep meditations, it's not going to have any impact once your brain shuts off from it. Um, so when you dream, if you're at a dreaming part of your dream may integrate some bits that you hear, in the same way that if a train goes by outside and you're asleep and you're in a dreaming state, then because dreaming is nearly at waking level, you might end up having it that the two things kind of overlay a bit. So that train that goes by might sound like a rumble as part of the your dream. There might be a rumble coming from somewhere. Maybe someone starts talking about an earthquake in your dream or something. Um, so you get things like that happen, but you have to be. You're not really responding to it in the same way that you would if you're listening to it therapeutically, and it's only during the dreaming part, not during the non-dreaming sleep. But you can obviously talk to somebody, get their attention, talk softly to somebody, gradually get their attention so that they start responding to you, or match their breathing and get their attention, etc. And you can work from there and then make it so that you're part of their reality and then start to influence them. Um, Most people obviously don't know things, how to do anything like that, or have the motivation to do it. And there is the risk that someone could just open their eyes and think, I feel manipulated, and open their eyes and come out of it. Just having a look, trying to work my way down this list of things. Yeah, that sounds like a very good thing to be able to do. I've never been able to do that. Um, just reading down. Yeah, I gave you the link to all of my pain tracks, um, to download all the MP3 files. One of which is obviously a back pain one, but then there's others for different for any pain. So there's some that literally will work with any pain. Some that will work like I think there's a migraine one, perhaps. I can't remember what they all are now, and most of them are for whatever the pain is. But there was one specific for back pain. Um, but it would be about finding which one worked best for you among the ones that were there, if any. Yeah, the thing about doing things, for example, one big issue is that hypnosis isn't a therapy. Hypnosis is just about focusing attention. Um, it's not a therapy. So when you get people that kind of use hypnosis um, to do things like quit smoking, it's not necessarily what's on an MP3. Say even if it's mine, a lot of people have used my quit smoking track on YouTube, and have found it helpful to quit smoking with it. But it's not always the only thing. You know, you need to think about other bits and pieces as well. Like, if you smoke to socialize, I think I try and cover some of this in my track that I have available, at least in the longer version. Um, but if you smoke, say, to socialize, then you're going to have to go through different therapy. Like, you're going to have to figure out what you do instead to socialize, compared to, say, if you smoke as just a pattern thing, like it's become a habit. Or if you smoke because you think of it as something, even though this isn't correct, you think of it as something that calms you down. So whatever it is for every single individual, that smoking is their therapy for something, or is a pattern that used to be their therapy for something, is now just a pattern. And every individual will have a different therapy that's needed to kind of help them to quit smoking. And what you often end up finding is that a lot of self hypnosis things for helping people to quit smoking, or whatever it happens to be, end up essentially hypnotize the person, tell them they're going to be a non-smoker, that they're going to, you know, have fresh, clean lungs or whatever, and then count them out at the end. And that doesn't have anywhere among it about making sure that they're doing an alternative therapy for whatever that smoking was their therapy for. Um, yeah, if generally people dream for about 20% of the night. Um, the idea of dreams is that it's designed that you generally don't remember them, because, well, you shouldn't need to remember them. But if you uh, worry a lot, or suffer a lot of anxiety, or constantly start patterns during the day that you don't close during the day, then you dream a lot more. So entrepreneurs, for example, often dream a lot more. Sort of, very prolific entrepreneurs, people who constantly come up with new ideas, and creative people can do this as well. That even when you're positive during your day, you can become depressed because you overdream. You spend so much time opening patterns. Like, I've got this idea for doing this. I've got that idea for doing that. I've got this idea for doing this. And you can't do all the ideas you keep coming up with. And you're really excited by all these ideas. And so you've got this high level of emotional arousal going on in your body every day, good or bad. And it's all unclosed patterns constantly being fired every day. And so you then overdream at night because you're trying to close all these patterns throughout the night, often end up waking up early because uh, your brain is saying, you're dreaming too much, we're just going to make you open your eyes and wake up. Then you feel really exhausted. And so you then end up, if you're lucky, you fall asleep again, but now wake up late feeling really lethargic and terrible. Um, and then repeat the pattern again the next day and the next day. And then you can end up becoming depressed. Um, and yet you might think, I don't even know why I'm becoming depressed, because I have nothing to worry about in life. But it's not. It's because of the emotional arousal, not what the emotion is. It's not necessarily worry. It's the fact that you're just doing a lot of it. Let me just look, trying to open other pages at the same time. Yep, it is in that folder. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, there's 9 different pain things in that folder, I think. So yeah, so it is in the folder, the back pain one. Yeah, the important thing with all of them is, with any self hypnosis or any therapy, is it's about active engagement. So if you're not engaging with it, then nothing will change, nothing will happen. So you have to be actively engaging with the process that's on it. And they all have different processes, obviously, but you have to actively be engaging with the processes. So it's not just about listening to them all over and over. It's about um, finding one that's the one that resonates best for the approach and works best for you, and then using that one to begin to use that better each time. So, for example, if you're using the white light process of imagining a white light around the area of pain and then imagining that shrinking right down until it's a really, really tiny ball and then leaving outside of you and then dropping to the floor or whatever, um, then you would use that one. And the first time you use it, maybe you struggle to get that white light. Maybe the track goes too quick for you because it is a track and not someone working with you face to face where they can go at your speed. But then gradually over time, you get better at being able to then master that one technique of, okay, so this time it went too quick for me last time. This time, let's do it again. But as this white light comes in, I know what I have to do now because I've already been through it. And so you just get better at doing it. And then there are others which, for example, there's a kind of conversational one, which is far more like the type of thing um, that Milton Erickson used to do. But then Erickson was in so much pain for most of his life. He wrote vast numbers of pain management or pain um, articles about managing pain. And the thing that he said, he tried things like ramming his throat onto the end of his bed to kind of cause himself as much physical pain as he could, so that he could then, when he released that, he could then get rid of the pain he was causing himself, but also take away the pain that wasn't caused himself. And he said that the only thing he found that consistently worked was that he would wake up in the morning and say to himself, "I'd like to be pain free by about lunchtime." He would trust that's enough time for his body to get pain free. And then he'd crack on with his day. And then about lunchtime, he would notice that he's now been pain free. He would just suddenly think, "Oh, I haven't felt any pain for a little while." And he would realize he'd been pain free. And so for him, that's what he found was the strategy that worked best. That he would, instead of doing all these different pain techniques, and that for self hypnosis as well, that's what I do for self hypnosis. I just tell myself a realistic time scale to do something. And I just say, "Oh, by this time, can you get that done, please?" And then I crack on with my day. And then by that time, as long as that was an appropriate amount of time to make the relevant changes, then I've done whatever it was internally had to be done. So if it's like, I can't remember so and so's name, oh, by the end of today, I'd like you to let me know that person's name. And then I crack on with my day. And then by that a certain time later on, I think, oh, yeah, that's the person's name. And it would suddenly appear in my mind. So that's what I do for self hypnosis. That's what I find the most helpful. That's what seems to match up with what a lot of uh, scientific research points to, not necessarily hypnosis research, but if you look at research within uh, sort of how the unconscious mind or unconscious processes work, it seems to match up with that. So for me, that's all I do. And that's what, and I found it very interesting that I wrote about this in my introduction to hypnotherapy. In that book, I wrote about that doing this, and I wrote about all the research on it, not specifically to do with pain, but just in general, to do with sort of self hypnosis, and how all that research isn't among the hypnosis literature because they've come at it without hypnosis being a part of how they've come at it. And that I thought it was really interesting that this was also a finding that Milton Erickson had in the 1970s, long before this research existed. Do I use my own hypnosis tracks? I make my own hypnosis tracks sometimes. So, for example, if they're normally it's where I want to do mental rehearsal, that's normally why I would make a track for myself. So I would think, for example, I want to learn whatever the subject is better, and or I want to say I'm going to give some talks or something. I might think I want to be able to practice giving those talks. So I would do some kind of track that would guide myself to a place where I can then mentally rehearse doing those talks. But I can take the pressure off of having to just do it to myself by closing my eyes and doing it myself, by following along to a voice telling me, sort of guiding me through the process instead of me doing it to myself. Um, Likewise, after being ran over and initially finding myself getting very wary around roads, and then obviously a psychiatrist told me that I had PTSD, which I've told that story before. Um, I just made myself a track, listened to the track to make it so that it was far more normalized, so that it stopped having a hold over me, and instead I'd be more comfortable. So I'm now what I like to think of as sensibly cautious. So I'm not as flippant about it as I was beforehand, because I've had an experience that's taught me that roads can be dangerous. Whereas literally, until I got hit by a truck, I genuinely used to believe that I would bounce whatever happened. I used to, as a kid, I would throw myself off of cliffs into the tops of trees when playing manhunt. So where I lived, there's cliffs going along, and then there's treetops. And so I'd be chased by other kids, and I'd think, "You're not going to chase me if I jump off the cliff." So I would just jump off the cliff towards the trees and think the trees will break my fall, so I'll be perfectly fine. And I'd get a few cuts and bruises from time to time, but I'd just brush myself off and wander off. Um, I remember with my brother, we went down a hill on a homemade go kart towards oncoming traffic. We steered to make sure we didn't hit the oncoming traffic. It was a very quiet road, so we weren't necessarily expecting oncoming traffic, but there was oncoming traffic. Um, we had a bit of a crash. I just brushed myself off and was ready to carry on with the day. My brother looked like someone had shot him in the back of the head, and the bullet didn't make it out the front. He had this enormous bulge sticking out the front of his head. Um, so many times I just used to think I'm probably completely invulnerable. So what I have now is that I've learned that that's not true. That I can break bones and I can be harmed. So I have to make sure I stop, look and listen, etc. Whereas before that, I would just think you'd stop and look and listen because that's a sensible thing to do. But you would think, well, worst case is you get hit by a car, you brush yourself off, you carry on with your day. Um, and so I've learned that's not the case, obviously. Um, but I used my own track to do that. I just put the rewind technique onto a track so that I could just follow along to it and then carry on with my day the next day. And I obviously used it for weight loss. It's on YouTube, the one that I created for myself for weight loss back in 2010 or 2012, or I don't know when 2010, I think it was, um, where I lost 2 stone in 2 months or 3 stone in 2 months or whatever it was. I can't remember now. Um, but that was using, I just made a self hypnosis track for that. Um, I've obviously used pain ones. So again, sometimes it's easier to do a technique by being able to just follow along to it than nowadays. I just say, can I have the pain gone by such and such time? But there are times that I might be, say, on a bus or something, and I put on like the white light pain removal track for the process rather than have to do it for myself. But normally it's where there is some kind of mental sort of guided visualization-y part to it, or some kind of mental rehearsal, that I want to be able to follow instructions to follow it rather than have to think about the process of getting to, be focused enough to do the mental rehearsal. Um, and then I obviously do listen to things like my sleep meditations sometimes to fall asleep, or the meditainment ones. Yeah, I shared the link. I think twice now I've shared it. Because there's like 9 tracks or something in there. Because obviously I'd mentioned about the fact that I was going to have to remove them from the folder at some point because I need it empty so that I can put other bits in my folder. So I sort of mentioned about just downloading them so that you've got them on your computer. Um, you could try giving yourself a time. So that's what I would probably try in relation to the sleep paralysis. Um, what I would probably try is giving myself a suggestion that includes time distortion. So saying to myself, perhaps even before you go to sleep, just that you start embedding the idea, you know, if I wake up and um, my body's paralyzed, it'll take all the time it needs over a second or two, or over 5 or 10 seconds, or whatever you think is reasonable, um, to become, for it to move or something like that. Or, it'll feel like it'll feel like I can move in seconds, in a couple of seconds or something, that just gives you some kind of time frame. So I'll probably do that one. That if I wake up and find that I'm still paralyzed, I'll be able to move in a couple of seconds, and just keep telling yourself that when you fall asleep, and see if that ends up working because you're giving yourself that suggestion before you go to sleep. Um, for me, I don't find it weird hypnotizing myself in my own voice. I sound like nowadays. I sound like I think I sound. Obviously, in the very early days, going back like 20 odd years, um, I would listen to my voice and think, do I really sound that squeaky and high pitched and weird? Um, and it would be odd. Uh, I don't remember it ever kind of being a problem, but I do remember thinking about it being weird. But now, obviously, I've done it literally thousands and thousands of times. I've recorded and listened to my voice. As a teenager, I used to record onto cassette tapes and then listen back, hypnotizing myself with the cassette tape I've just recorded. Um, that carried on till the early 2000s when I started doing that onto. I will say hello to Abby. I started then doing that obviously onto computers. The difference is that actually was worse sound quality on a computer than on a cassette tape. I found, but I used to then do that on computers and then copy it onto things, and then digital dictaphone things as well. So I've always kind of recorded my voice and then listened to it back. I've got recordings going way back, like 20 odd years of me doing what I do. There isn't really any secret to downloading it to your computer. You, in theory, just open the file and click download, or select it to download it. The meditainment ones I use vary. I don't necessarily, for example, use the sleep one for sleep. All I do, 'cause this is something that confuses me when people say, "Oh, you ended it." So, say my normal meditations or self hypnosis, they'll say, "You ended it with saying that I'd wake up from it. That ruined it because obviously I wanted to fall asleep." Well, you don't have to follow the suggestion to wake up. So, so all you do is on the meditainment ones, for example, when it gets to the end where it says about waking up. No, not that. When it gets to the end and says about waking up, all you do is ignore it and just think, no, I'm relaxed. I'm happy to carry on just drifting off asleep. Um, just trying to get the link again. Right, that's the link again. So I'll listen, for example, to the meditainment ones that are like, just for relaxation, or they'll say, I don't know, for peace or for calm or something. I just find the ones that I like and then listen to them. So if it's like, oh, I like that because you're rowing down the Amazon, then I'll listen to it because I like the sound of rowing down the Amazon. If it's, I don't know, walking through a meadow, like a country meadow one, I'll listen to it again because I want to be listening to something relaxing and falling asleep to something walking through a meadow. So I don't care what it says it's about helping. I'm not interested necessarily in that. Um, it's just puts you out and says, you go back to wakeful awareness on 3, 2, 1, etc., and drift back to the room, kind of thing. I just ignore that and just carry on drifting off asleep. And if I don't feel like I'm asleep yet, I just carry on listening to the next one, because they're quite short. They're like 22 minutes normally. So I then just carry on listening to the next one and do the same. You don't have to follow a suggestion just because someone's given it. You don't have to obviously uh, wake up. But yes, there's, I think, 9 tracks in there. Hopefully you can just literally click it and save all the tracks to your computer or your mobile phone or whatever, so that they're all there. Thank you to your friend. Glad I have a nice voice, not a squeaky voice like I think I have. Although I don't think I have a squeaky voice now, but when I used to first hear it. I've always tried not to have a haircut, really, if I can help it. Yeah, they're all MP3s. I don't know what the videos are you're on about. I don't have any. When you asked, I said that as far as I was aware, I think I only had one video available or something. So that's the link that I shared previously. The twice, I think, well, 3 times now. So hopefully you can access them this time. So anyway, hello, Sophia. I'm about to go because it's 3 hours 44 minutes in. Well, even at the beginning, I didn't have a squeaky voice. I just felt like it just sounded to me like I had a squeaky voice. I listen to myself back now, and I don't have a squeaky voice. Yeah, I'd shared the link to all of the 9 meditation pain management tracks before. Yeah, you were chatty today, because I finished the story at 1 hour 39 minutes in, so that's quite a long time ago. So I'm obviously grateful that you've managed to hang around with me for nearly 4 hours without any of us taking, or at least I don't know about you, but I haven't taken a toilet break. I've no idea. I can't remember what's in the different stories. Was there a witch in the one with the, what is it? The fortune teller one. Didn't that have a witch with a back garden and everything with the fairies and things? Is that one? I'm trying to remember. I can't remember what the week 16 story was. I've had witches asked for a few times. But if it was normally I'm running 2 weeks behind on getting them onto YouTube as edited versions. So the last one I put on YouTube was the fortune teller one, where you meet the fortune teller on the pier, who gives you a notice which says they're all good witches. I don't know of bad witches in my stories. You get the notice that says something like 3, 2, 1, sleep, or something, and you end up with the fog appearing, and you end up meeting the pirates, going on your little journey. I can't remember any more than that, but that was the last one. Yeah, it's always going to be a good witch. It's never going to not be a good witch if it's in my story. If it isn't a good witch, it's going to be a good witch by the end, at least. The only exception would be if I was doing, say, the Dragon's Fire stories in that world. But yeah, but giving me the weeks, I can't remember what stories came out of what things, which has been suggested a number of times. The one before the fortune teller one, Oh, that one's been live, I think, for a while. The Hero Suit and the Witch in the Fairy Garden. I'm pretty sure that one. Um, isn't that the one with the three amigos in the dam? Isn't it the three amigos in the dam? The one with the hero suit, the witch, and the fairy garden, where you've got the platypus, the otter, and the beaver. The thumbnail for that one is a platypus, otter, and beaver. I can't remember the title I gave it, but and I'm on YouTube on this page, so I can't look at a different one. So yeah, so it's I assume Hope and Discovery was the title it must have been called. And yeah, the cover is woodland in the background, grass in front of the woods, and the three amigos standing on the grass. So yeah, generally, whatever goes live, whatever happens during a live stream, so whatever happens on Monday night, um, will end up going live. I think I'm 2 weeks behind. Someone will know better than me if they can recall when the fortune teller one was in a live stream. But whenever the fortune teller one was in a live stream, I did that live on. I posted that on Wednesday, so that would have been, I think, 2 weeks ago or something. So anyway, um, so anyway, I'm going to shoot off. It's now been approaching 4 hours. I'll be back again tomorrow. I've no idea what we'll do tomorrow because I've finished my story. I'll find something to do for tomorrow, but I'll be back again tomorrow about 7:30 UK time, and I might have to start trying to make these a more proper length of time so that I don't end up doing an additional 3 or 4 hours work a night, um, like do an hour or something. But I will definitely be back tomorrow, back on Sunday, Easter Sunday. Maybe I'll sit and eat an Easter egg on Sunday. Do an hour of Dan shoving chocolate in his face. So yeah, back on Saturday, back on Sunday. Then on Monday will be the 10 p.m. normal live meditation thing, and then obviously Wednesday that gets one will go on onto my channel. So I'm going to carry on attempting to do something live every night as far as I can, unless I end up thinking, oh no, this is getting too much now. I need a day off and have a break. But I'm okay right now. So yeah, there wouldn't be a lot of talking if I'm just shoveling food in my face, though. So thank you all for joining me again. And obviously, if you haven't, feel free to give a thumbs up and feel free to subscribe if you're here and you're not a subscriber. So I will see you all. Those of you who join me, I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.